All right, well, welcome everybody to the July 10th, 2017 Evanston City Council. City Clerk, could you take the roll?
Alderman Wilson. Here. Alderman Ruth Simmons.
Here.
Alderman Suffredin. Here. Alderman Ravel. Here. Alderman Rainey. Here. Alderman Fleming. Here. Alderman Fisk. Here. Alderman Braithwaite. Alderman Nguyen. Here. We have a quorum.
All right, everybody's here. Do we have a group here in the audience from Allowance for Good? I was told we were going to have a student group here tonight, but I don't see anyone. Not that everybody doesn't look young out there. Okay. All right. Well, the one announcement that I want to make sure everybody's clear about is the Citizen Police Complaint Assessment Committee, which the City Council created. Applications are in progress right now. We are accepting applications until July 28th. Okay, we're giving 30 days for applications. So we've had 13 people that have submitted an application to be on that committee. There will be 9 people on that committee. And so if you are interested in applying to be on that committee, just go ahead and Google Citizen Police Complaint Assessment Committee, and you will find it on the city website. And again, July 28th is the deadline. City Manager, do you have any announcements?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. I just want to plug this coming weekend's World Art and Music Festival. This is a new approach that we're taking to a lakefront festival. Lots of exciting things. We're going to divide things up by continent so that you'll have an Africa area, a Europe area, Asia, South America, North America, and then a fair trade area of vendors. So there'll be music and food and all of that. It is Saturday, July the 15th. It's Sunday, July 16th from 12 to 7 at Dawes Park on the lakefront. So very excited. Thank Lawrence Hemingway and our Parks, Recreation, and Community Services staff for kind of rethinking this festival. I think this is going to be a little bit more unique and different. As you know, we are not doing the Lakefront Arts Festival any longer, so this is our main lakefront festival for the year, so we're very excited about it. Encourage everyone to come out. That's all I have.
Okay, City Clerk, any communications?
Just one. There's been a small update to the clerk's hours, and now on Fridays we close at 5 o'clock as opposed to 7. That's it.
All right. Okay, public comment. We have, has everybody that is interested in public comment gone ahead and signed up for public comment? Okay, so if so, we've got 15 people on here that have signed up. Our rules allow for 45 minutes of public comment, so today everybody will get 3 minutes. If you need the 3 minutes, if you can get across your message in less than 3 minutes, we welcome that. Everybody else in the room welcomes that. As always, the reason that we have a time limit is we want to be respectful of the other folks in the public here who want to make comments. So at 2:45, I will let you know if you're still talking that you've got 15 more seconds to wrap it up. Okay, so please be considerate of everybody in the room, including the council members up here. So the first person up is Dan Joseph, and if you guys can make sure to give your name in case I mangle it, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
I don't think you'll mangle it. Good evening. I am Dan Joseph, 1510 Greenwood. I mangled it, in Evanston. I've been a homeowner long enough that my mortgage is paid up.
That's a good thing these days.
Yeah. Hope the same happens to everybody else. Evanston has a one-time non-matching grant for transit that requires the inclusion of older adults and people with disabilities. I suggest a pilot program for a scheduled free bus service on Emerson and Dodge from downtown Evanston to the Howard McCormick Plaza via Emerson, Dodge, and Howard. This will benefit everyone by using regular scheduled service to provide access on Sunday for West Side Evanstonians to employment, religious services, the Levy Center, and shopping. West Side residents have not had basic crosstown transit service since the Evanston Bus Company's abandonment in 1973 of Route 7 Dodge and 3 Main Grant via Dodge. Anybody remember those?
You got someone back there.
Okay. An estimated cost using figures provided by Pace Bus for a 6-month trial would be substantially less than the amount of the grant. I can provide the calculations on request. This is Transit for All. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Next speaker is Tom Ward.
Good evening. I'm Tom Ward. We have a business at 2230 Main Street, Ward Manufacturing. And I just want to talk a little bit about the sick leave ordinance that passed last week. We've been in Evanston for 65 years. We've got 50 employees, and we have a generous compensation plan for all of our employees. We're a responsible employer here in Evanston. We exceed the minimum wage requirement now, so I can't say that that's not absolutely fair and warranted. I believe in that. This ordinance will cost us approximately $50,000 a year in sick leave. And on top of that, people not showing up for work, which will happen, it will cause loss of production, which is a problem. If 5 people don't show up for work tomorrow, there are quite a few of my machines that will not operate. So it's something I need to contend with, and certainly I will. We'll survive, we'll adapt. I'm not here to cry spilt milk. Administratively, though, it will be a problem, I believe, for many small businesses in Evanston. And some of those costs, I think, will be onerous. My whole point in coming up here is just say, I just hope that we can continue the conversation about how it's going to be dealt with, because I don't know that everyone did all the math on what it's going to cost long term. There are ways to adjust and adapt, but I just ask that that we continue to talk about it, because some small businesses, I think, will be impacted greatly by it. I know, because we looked at it administratively immediately, and we kind of scratched our heads and said, well, we've got a team of people. We've got people to deal with this. We've got, payroll services that can help us manage this. But I think we're not maybe the norm. We're a little bit bigger than some of the people that are out there that are going to struggle with this. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Next is Dave Cantor.
Good evening. My name is Dave Cantor. I'm counsel for the Pavement Coatings Technology Council, a trade association which represents the interests of manufacturers of coal tar pavement sealants, some of whom will be directly and significantly impacted by the coal tar sealant ordinance that's up for vote today. I was given 3 minutes at the Human Services Committee on June 5th to try to give my side of the story. I was given 1 minute at the City Council meeting on June 26th to try to give my side of the story. Can't be done during the public comment period. I've sent materials to each of you. I wrote to Mayor Hegarty immediately after the City Council meeting on June 26th. I've asked multiple times for the opportunity to make a presentation to the Environment Board, the Human Services Committee, or to City Council explaining the other side of the story. You've only heard one side of the story. The Environment Board received information from the League of Women Voters, which it considered. I'm familiar with the League of Women Voters. My mother was very active in the League of Women Voters in the 60s and 70s. This is not my mother's League of Women Voters. They are not a science-based group. They never have been. They are an advocacy group. In fact, they surrendered their 501c3 status to do that. The Environment Board heard their side of the story. At the 2 meetings I've attended, I've heard misinformation from about coal tar sealants from the League of Women Voters. I've heard blatant misinformation about the human health effects purportedly associated with exposure to coal tar sealants from another advocacy group called Physicians for Social Responsibility. And I've heard incorrect information about the use and availability of coal tar sealants in Evanston from Mr. Stoneback. I've been waiting and waiting for the opportunity to present the other side of the story, and that opportunity is never going to be given. So I ask 3 rhetorical questions tonight. First, why is the City Council of Evanston committed to passing an ordinance when it's only heard one side of the story and repeatedly refused to hear the other side of the story? Two, why is the City Council of Evanston committed to passing an ordinance that is not based on science? And three, why is the City Council of Evanston committed to passing an ordinance without having any evidence that you have a problem? You haven't run a single test to see if you have elevated levels of PAHs or PAHs from coal tar sealants in water, soil, or sediment. Not a single test. This is not a science-based decision you're making or a science-based ordinance you are voting on. In fact, it is a solution in search of a problem. I'm disappointed, and as you can probably tell, frustrated and at a loss to understand your lack of interest in hearing from my client and hearing both sides of the story on the ordinance you're going to be voting on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next speaker is Janad Rizki.
Well, I'm disappointed too, but not about that issue. There's plenty of others. The citizens of Evanston need a major voice in Mr. Bobkowitz's performance review this year. The chaotic operation of this city and its deteriorating budget picture has nothing to do with the state budget or Harley Clark. We're at the midpoint of the year, and now we're told of a budget crisis. While it's been hinted at all year, I'm wondering how much did this play out with Mr. Bobkowitz looking for another job and not really talking to us sooner of the issues. I want to outline some of my concerns when I talk about performance here. Borrowing against a line of credit to support questionable TIF activities in the tunes of millions of dollars. Increments are supposed to be coming back from the TIFs that never came, and we're borrowing money against revolving lines. A pattern of misuse of the general fund to support bankrupt TIFs, basically taking money out of the general fund, using them for TIFs. I suspect well over $500,000 to $1 million has been misused this way. The misuse of the $20,000 rule is continually occurring here. The most famous, of course, is the patio on Howard Street, but it was recently said by a city employee, I wrote a contract that was under 20, but I'm coming back for more money. That's really a violation of the $20,000 rule, by the way. Numerous gifts to, I believe, private parties at Northwestern University with no return to the taxpayers. One of the most obvious was the water reservoir that's over $20 million, and we're worried about people's water bills being turned off. That was really outrageous. Too many unnecessary lawsuits against the city, one from a former director, and now the James Park mess. This approached over $3 million. There are many issues here with staff and operations. One of the most biggest red flags was when Mr. Bobkowitz appointed the police chief to run the city's fire department on an interim basis. As one new council member pointed out on Harley Clark, why did we spend $400,000 to re-roof 2 garages? I personally asked the rec board not to remove this from the capital plan, and they did remove it. But guess what? It came back with Mr. Bobkowitz. The most disturbing issue here, which I believe the public may not be quite aware of, is how Mr. Bobkowitz has treated staff here. I spoke privately to Recreation Department employees who told me Harley Clark could support numerous programs, but a few weeks later, those same employees would not talk to me. I find that very disturbing, that basically we're manipulating things here, then we're not being truthful. I believe Mr. Bobkowitz should be under probation for his performance and his salary frozen. I believe an outside independent HR consultant should be brought in to investigate performance, reporting to a committee of neutral council members, possibly some of the new council members and citizens. Mayor Haggerty,
15 more seconds.
You stated Mr. Bobkowitz was an outstanding city manager. I don't believe you should have a seat on that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Casey Christensen, and then after Casey will be Scott, I can't really read the writing here, Schwalek, and then Karen Courtwright.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I'm Casey Christensen, a proud member of the League of Women Voters, and this year co-president of the Evanston League. I just want to say a couple of things about the coal tar sealant. I want to encourage you tonight to vote for the ban of the use of coal tar sealant in the city of Evanston. At the last City Council meeting, a number of people spoke in favor of this ban, and tonight I just wanted to simplify our message. We believe that this ordinance would ensure that no one unwittingly hires a contractor who could apply coal tar sealant, not knowing the effects of the PAHs. Secondly, alternative sealants are available at the same or modestly higher price. The ban would not impose undue harm on homeowners or businesses. My understanding is that your staff has recommended that you vote to ban coal tar sealant. As a league member and as a citizen of Evanston, I am proud of the care of which we have shown the environment. This ban would be another example of caring for our city. I thank you in advance for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. And next up, we have Scott Schwackel. Again, I might be messing up your name there, Scott. Schowolec. All right, and if we don't have Scott, how about Karen Courtwright, and then we'll have Carla Sutton.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. I'm Karen Courtwright, and I just wanted to make a comment about the continued discussion about the use of the Harley Clark Mansion, and I think tonight you are set to accept an RFP. I have an opinion about something that should be included in that RFP, and that is that it explicitly require that the people who are granted the lease for that facility be required to do outreach and specific services for the underserved communities in Evanston. This location, the Harley Clark location, beautiful, lovely, great beach, all that, is in a part of town and that doesn't provide tons of parking for use by the community, and also is not heavily served, let's say. I know there is some public transit service, but there's not a lot. It's not regular. It's not frequent during the day in the summer. And I think that we should be very explicit that this facility overcome the fact that it's in a very well-to-do neighborhood. And we know that community recreation facilities tend to serve those within a certain radius of the location, and that radius is a very well-served part of our population. And I'd just like to make sure that we don't assume that just if there are school programs, for example, that are being offered at that facility, that we are doing explicit outreach and programming for the underserved communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Next up is Carla Sutton, and then after Carlos will be Linda Damashek.
Good evening, Mayor, City Manager, and also members of the council. I'm Carla Sutton. I reside at 1821 Darrow Avenue, and I want to make comments on concerns that have really upset me over the last couple meetings. My concern is that there seems to be a misconception that there's a conflict in our community about funding Harley Clark and not adequately funding Fleetwood Jourdain. I want to make it clear that there's no division, and we won't accept one in our community that pits one group against the other. It does not exist, and we won't tolerate it. Fleetwood Jourdain was the idea of Alderman Jourdain in the 30s and 40s, but it was not built until 1956. Fleetwood Jourdain is the recipient of allocations in the 2017 budget for repairs and upgrades. I've worked consistently with the Harley Clark and No Park Sale supporters for over 4 years. My input has always been included in their concerns to maintain that property, Harley Clark, be open to the public and access to all Evanstonians. I was very disappointed by the rejection of a presentation and proposal for an offer presented to the City Council and an opening to consider other RFPs. CBDG funds have and always will be a way of continuing to fund and support Fleetwood Jourdain and should be increased. There's no conflict in funding Harley Clark at the expense of neglecting Fleetwood Jourdain. I want everyone in Evanston to know that the Fifth Ward should have access to our ocean, Lake Michigan and lakefront, through Harley Clark. My concerns are that the building will always have access to the public and all Evanstonians. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Next up is Linda, and then after Linda, we have Mary Rosinski and then Tom Hodgman.
Good evening, Linda Damashek. I am coming with a very specific request to change the wording of the RFP under consideration this evening. I'm specifically referring to page 43 of the packet. In the first paragraph sentence, talking about, I believe that these words should be replaced and offer public access and/or experience. And I request that they be replaced with the words, create a high-quality public use consistent with the Lakefront Master Plan. I believe that what's in the proposal, only saying public access, is way too limited a goal. And using the word merely experience is way too vague. Public use is very clear in the focus for substantive public use for every single resident in the city of Evanston, all wards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Next up is Mary Rosinski, and then after Mary, we have Tom Hodgman, and then Irv Chakol. I can't read the writing.
Hi, Mary Rosinski. I live on Chancellor. I just want to reiterate what this woman ahead of me with the white was saying about outreach to all of Evanston. That is something when I've been on No Park Sale, I'm part of the Lake House group, I'm on the DJ Coleman Foundation. And one of the things that we have stressed for the last 4 years was opening up this space and making it accessible to all of Evanston residents. And I've heard previously, it's a white beach. It's a white area. No one's going to go there. And I'm like, we're talking equity right now in this town, and why we keep going back to that's the white beach is crazy. And if anything, this city council should be getting to make sure maybe there's a bus more frequently going down to Harley Clark Beach, whoever ends up using it. But I do want to make it known that over the last couple of years, we reached out to the Mitchell Museum to see if they would do some programming there in conjunction. We reached out to Shorefront, and last year, DJ Coleman, we approached the city to be able to do our awards there. And so it is a place that I think a lot of different people would use. Shorefront has not responded, but we thought that they should have a space in that building so that all the kids, white and black, will be able to see the museum that Gina Robinson has created. And there's a lot of variety of kids, racial, culturally, and ethnically, all over at the beaches for the camps they do down at the beach, and there's no reason why that could not extend into the Harley Clark as one of their experiences. So I just want to reiterate the program that was out there from the Lake House Group has definitely been a conscious effort, speaking to lots of people of different colors, races, religions, to say what will make this a unified place. And I would hope that the Evanston Council would really take that into consideration and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Tom Hodgman, and then Irv.
Thank you, Mayor, City Manager, City Council. First, I want to say thanks to the City Manager and City staff. You guys did a quick turnaround on the RFP. Appreciate that over what was a holiday weekend. So thank you guys for paying attention to this. We have been at this for 5 years, and so while I appreciate being responsive and getting this done, I don't think we should rush this process, and we should take the time to hear comments and make sure we do get it right. We have a few comments on the RFP that we would like some clarifications and potentially some changes. On the timing of the RFP, we note that it's longer than most other RFPs that the city puts out, probably warranted given how special this place is and the nature of what we're talking about here. An award made in January of 2018 will likely mean that the building is not open for next summer. which would be a shame. It'd be great to get things going over there with whoever the successful bidder is. It also means that if the award is not made till January 2018, any successful bidder will miss out on year-end fundraising in 2017, which is a critical time for nonprofits to be fundraising at year-end. The RFP makes no mention of the $250,000 that was allocated by council in September 2016. We would just like clarification around those funds and how they'll be used, if they'll be invested alongside a successful bidder. We think that's important, that any bidder would want to know how those funds will be used. The RFP says no other land will be included, just the buildings. We obviously have talked about investing in restoration of the Jens Jensen landscape and promoting that sort of environmental and cultural tourism. So we'd like clarification regarding the Jensen Gardens and if investment there is something that a bidder should consider. Given all the past process that's gone on, Citizens Committee, the open houses that were advertised by the city, the Harley Clark Planning Committee, there's been a lot of process. We think the criteria should be more specific. References to the Lakefront Master Plan would strengthen it. Equity references, it's a conversation we're having right now. We're very committed to this. Something about the greatest good for the greatest number in the long term, not just any old nonprofit. There are a couple things around insurance and minority women and Evanston-based businesses. We think those definitely should be in the lease contract, maybe not in the proposal phase. For a startup nonprofit, we wouldn't purchase insurance unless we were the successful bidder. So to require that we have insurance in the proposal phase may be a bit out of order, and we'd just like some clarification there. I think those are my comments. Thank you guys for your consideration, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Next up is Irv, and then Jeremy Hurst, and then Wendy Pollock.
Hi, I'm Irv Chokel. I've been a resident of the city for over 40 years now, and I want to talk about the minimum wage ordinance. I think this could be a situation with unintended consequences. I'm not personally affected either way. It's not going to affect me personally. But I think it could be a mistake where they've tried this or where they've done this. They find the employees' hours are cut, so they're not making any more money than they were before. And young people, teenagers and young adults, need to have an opportunity to get a job for the first time. That's not going to happen with the minimum wage increasing. So those are my comments. I think that should be those things should be taken in consideration. I think you're going to have unintended consequences.
Thank you, Irv.
One other point I forgot. Also, another result where this has happened, they've eliminated employee jobs by mechanizing or computerizing the work that they're doing. Because it's over the long haul, it's a lot less expensive than the minimum wages that are proposed.
Thank you. Jerry Hurst, and then Wendy Pollock, and then Leslie Shadden.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jerry Hurst, 325 Dodge, Evanston. I was here 2 weeks ago speaking in favor of the proposed ban, the ordinance on coal tar sealant. The Environment Board encourages you to pass this ordinance. I'm a board member of Citizens Greener Evanston. I also encourage you to pass the ordinance. I'm proud of what the city has done environmentally, and I'd like you to continue to do the right thing. I disagree with the previous speaker. I believe this is a science-based decision. It is not just, it is a science-based decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Wendy?
Hi, good evening. I'm Wendy Pollock, co-chair of the Environment Board. I wanted to thank you for having given due weight in the coal tar ban issue to the scientific evidence from agencies whose only mission is to look out for the public health and environmental health. The evidence is there. The Environment Board recommended that you pass this. As you know, we operate under the Open Meetings Act. When citizens come to make comments or anybody else, they are listened to. We had this on our agenda, and Mr. Cantor did not come to any meetings. So what he just said was not true. He would have been absolutely free to come and lay out his case there, but we were aware of it at the time, and we did give it consideration. I did want to mention on a personal note, my husband is a doctor and an old public health person from the state of New Jersey, and he has told me this is one of the oldest cases in the books of public health. But we haven't talked enough about what it does to the workers who have to work with these aromatic substances. It is very bad for their lungs. And their cases, their studies going back into the 19th century of actually sort of preceding this of chimney sweeps and the effect on chimney sweeps. It's some of the oldest public health studies in the world. And finally, it's really a no-brainer. We just had our driveway resealed this week. It never even came up. There weren't a ton of fumes. They're using other materials, so it's really not something that you should have to think about too hard. I hope you'll vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Leslie?
Hi, I'm Leslie Shad. I'm also on the Board of Citizens Greener Evanston and in support of the coal tar ban and to support what they have said. I just wanted to mention that the American Medical Association is also strongly supporting bans on coal tar sealants. They released a report in November 2016, which is a science-based organization, I believe. They also, in reference to what Wendy said, for people who have lifelong exposure to coal tar sealants, they have a 38-fold higher risk of cancer. So, I mean, it's real. So I just wanted to mention that. And on Harley Clark, I've not been engaged in that issue deeply, but I just hope that whatever you do for Harley Clark, you protect the natural environment there. That we have so little natural environment on the beach that is truly, a limited acreage for the populace. So I just want to, whatever happens, whether you lease it or not, what it goes, but I hope you'll protect the natural environment there. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And the last speaker we had signed up was Priscilla Giles. And again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names up here.
Suggest that we move some of these around. Do the ones that people are here for first.
I'm Priscilla Giles, and I want to speak to, I guess, the hearts of the people on the council. And that is, I was at the 150 meeting, I'll call it, at Fleetwood Jourdain, and we were asked what we would like to see, and we told what we would like to see. None of that has happened. Nothing that the residents there spoke about. What we do see is a lot of high-rises that have bought out so that they don't have to house the people who are being lost from Evanston, who are being sent to other cities. They are receiving our poor when we can take care of our poor ourselves. And I wonder, is this the equity that Evanston boasts of?
Thank you. And we have one final speaker, which is Kira Kelly.
Hi, I wanted to speak to the process. Process and transparency were big themes in the past election, and they've become a little worrisome to me as I see them playing out in the Harley Clark situation. Really, the public, the city, and the Lake House Group had already gone through a process for years, including the RFP and the RFI. There were 6 years of meetings, directives, surveys, community engagement, and thousands of residents have come out in droves on this, the process of community involvement. The culmination of all this process was the Harley Clark Committee, convened by the city, which recommended the Lake House Plan process. In coming up with a second round of RFP, after we already had an RFP, feels like the council, the city, I hope not, are trying to contort the process to have an outcome that they like, and this is concerning to me. Also, through an official process, the City Council voted unanimously to approve $250,000 allocated for basic repairs to Harley Clark. This came after great work and support from the community. That, too, is lawful process. The community-based Lake House Group are homegrown Evanstonians who, to no gain for themselves, simply want to make this happen for the community. It's our best chance to keep this beautiful, iconic building in Evanston at little or no cost to the city and give us an incredible, unique asset with a commitment to every kid in Evanston, to every person in Evanston, and to experience something beautiful, as Alderman Robin Rue in the last council meeting articulated with her first of hopefully many experiences at the Lighthouse Beach and the Mansion. The beach and the lake house can truly belong to everyone now. I'm hoping and believing that the RFP is truly happening in good faith, like Don Wilson said, to simply make sure the language matches his original resolution and not just to get another outcome. I hope the council follows the process that their citizens themselves had followed in good faith for years, and their own committee recommends, the Evanston Lake House Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Kara. Okay. All right, that concludes public comment. We're now going to go on to special orders of business. We have several special orders of business tonight at the council meeting. Given the public comments that were made, we're going to change the order in which we address these. So the first one that I'd like as a council for us to have conversation on is SP5, which is request for proposal to lease the Harley Clark Mansion at 2603 Sheridan. Staff recommends City Council review and approval of the RFP to lease the Harley Clark Mansion to a nonprofit organization. So is there any conversation that would like to be had on this? And I would ask just the council members, I really appreciate, and I know everybody up here really appreciates, folks coming out on their time to talk to us. So let's keep in mind the points that were raised by different speakers as we have the conversation tonight. Alderman Ravel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On your desk this evening, there is a red line version of the RFP that incorporates a number of proposed revisions that I am suggesting to you tonight. And I'll just go through them. It starts at point 2.0, scope of services. And the first bullet point would be that the lessee would be asked to create a high-quality public use for the space consistent with the 2008 Lakefront Master Plan. Shall I go through all of them, or do people want to stop me if there's need to discuss each one?
Yeah, I think, why don't you run through them,
Okay.
Alderman Ravel.
And then just a couple paragraphs later, as stated, only the buildings set forth in this RFP, and then I propose we add, in parentheses, together with the adjacent Jens Jensen Gardens, are for consideration for lease, and that we would also then add an exhibit at the end of the RFP process that would basically give a drawing that shows the extent of the Jens Jensen Garden, so it'll be clear that, we're not talking about the whole Lighthouse Landing area. Then further, under insurance, just to make it clear that the insurance would be required of the successful bidder as part of the lease agreement and not something that would be required just as part of a proposal. So the successful bidder shall carry and maintain its own at its own cost, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next paragraph, as part of the lease agreement, the successful bidder must provide an insurance certificate, et cetera. So it just makes it clear that we're not asking for that insurance to be purchased as part of making a proposal for the building. Then moving further along, this is under submittal requirements, number C, proposed management, and it says clearly, I would propose that we say clearly identify the persons who would be assigned to negotiate and oversee this proposal, and obviously I'm making that request in light of the Lake House and Gardens organization, which does not have professional staff. Moving forward to discussion about the MWEBE goals, I think here I want to say something like, please be aware that the city has a goal of 25%. And that we would want the respondents to these to the RFP to basically make a commitment to involving MWEBEs as outlined in our goal of 25%. but it's really premature. It's not a normal kind of a bid where they would already be able to be in kind of a contract negotiations with actual businesses to do the work. In the evaluation criteria here, my changes are basically, I think what the role I'm proposing is that I guess we'd have a review committee, that would be city staff, who would look at the proposals and basically look at them for completeness, make sure that the information was accurate as best they could tell. But then all the proposals that would be submitted would come to the whole city council, that we would ourselves make a selection from looking at all the proposals rather than asking staff to make that a recommendation to us. Under the A, B, C, D, E, I suggest rewording E to say that we would look for a commitment to meeting the city's MWEBE participation goal. And then moving along under selection process, it would again make it clear that it's the city council that's going to select the proposal rather than reacting to recommendations from a review committee. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so Alderman Wilson, and then we'll go to Alderman Fisk.
Thank you. And I think Alderman Ravel's revisions addressed a lot of the things that were raised at the public comment. And I had a lot of these concerns as well. Particularly, I think it is important to include reference to the Lakefront Master Plan to ensure that it is consistent. And we should have a drawing that very clearly delineates exactly which portions of the property we're talking about. So there is no misunderstandings. Obviously, misunderstandings on the scope of the property were an issue in the past. With regard to, I lost my page here. Alderman Ravel on the WBE goals, I think we'll want to try to tailor the language. I think it's what you suggested is consistent with what we're trying to accomplish, but try to tailor the language to our existing requirements. And for example, people are allowed to try to get if they have a reason for a waiver, leave the waiver language in there. You wouldn't want to preclude that if there was some sort of reason for that. And I'd mentioned this to you before, I do feel like I would like to get a recommendation, but it wasn't clear to me who was going to be conducting the review. City Manager, did you already have that kind of sorted out as far as who would be doing the review?
Well, I think, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wilson, members of the council, I think what Alderman Ravel said makes a lot of sense. I think that staff can review for completeness, can review to make sure the terms and conditions are met and provide a report to the council. I would not want to make a qualitative evaluation.
Okay, all right, and I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Okay. But if something's missing, it would, obviously we would expect that to be drawn to our attention. Okay. All right, so generally speaking, I think these are good suggestions on the changes.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Wilson. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had some of the same concerns. I guess under 2.0 scope of services, I'd want to define a public use for the space. That seems to be overly general. I'm assuming that there can be wording put in that allows for public use of the space, but that the building is not necessarily 100% public use. I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is that I don't want to discourage somebody from coming forward who may have an idea for public use of part of the building but not another part of the building. So I'm not sure whether this represents 100% public use or not, but I would want to define that a little bit more carefully. So but I agree with consistent with the 2008 master plan. And a couple paragraphs down where it says, together with the adjacent Jens Jensen Gardens, there may be someone who comes forward who wants to use the building but is interested in community maintenance and care of the gardens, which I think someone
maybe Ms. Shad or someone mentioned tonight about a concern about the gardens. I could see that happening. So I'm not sure that it's in our best interest to tie the gardens to the building at this point. I think that can be for a further discussion and would probably be a better discussion than having that be a requirement. As far as the MWEBE goals, I agree with Alderman Wilson. Some of this comes from language that we put in all of our RFPs. And even though this is a unique RFP that we're sending out, I don't, and someone can certainly say reasons for their not being able to comply. I don't think it's a good idea to be changing language, just so that we can be consistent with other RFPs that we send out. And I do agree with the review committee of staff. I'd like to see something that compares the responses that we get in an orderly, non-judgmental way, but something that we can easily see the differences in what people are proposing for the property. So I think those are my comments. Yeah, those are my comments.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alderman Fisk. Alderman Rainey, and then we'll get Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, I think we should require a pre-bid presence. I think presence at a pre-bid meeting is absolutely required. And also a walkthrough is required of anybody submitting a proposal. The reason I'm saying that is because when you don't have that, it frequently takes up hours and hours of staff time of people calling up, asking questions that they could have had answered, or at least visual, they could have had taken care of it previously. I just cannot imagine somebody submitting a proposal on this project that has not been present at a pre-bid or a walkthrough. I just can't imagine it. And it's been made very clear in here several times that you don't need to be present. And I think we need to require it. So I would really encourage us to do that. And also, I don't know what we mean by this. On page 9, demonstrate financial capacity, demonstrate understanding of capital investment necessary. Are we going to give them a quiz? What are we going to ask to see their finance done in Bradstreet? What are we going to do? How are we going to handle that one? Yes, we promise we know what that means. Produce bank statements. How is that going to be handled?
Alderman Rainey, members of the council, again, this is largely standard type language, so we depend on the proposer to choose what they think is best to demonstrate that. Normally that is sufficient. If you would like to be more specific, we can, but normally in the past we've just asked the general question to depend on the proposer to be as specific as they think is appropriate.
Are you done, Alderman Rainey? And I'm going to
Yeah,
flip it. Okay. All right. Alderman Nguyen, and then we'll get Alderman Fleming.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I agree with most of the comments that everyone has made. I do think, even though it is an introductory paragraph, that the first paragraph should be modified to indicate that to follow the scope of services language on page 5, which Alderman Revelle has suggested, saying create a high-quality public use for the space. I think that the first paragraph under the title that starts, "The City of Evanston is seeking to enter into a long-term lease," that language that's there that says renovate the Harley Clark Mansion and offer public access and/or public experience initially struck me as much too vague, and that we should now make it parallel with the scope of services language that Alderman Revelle is suggesting, and say after renovate the Harley Clark Mansion and create a public use experience to make sure that that we're reinforcing what we're interested in doing. So that would be one of my suggestions. Then I agree with the other issues that have been raised. And the only other question that I would have is, do we need this much time? Should we make the time shorter, as was suggested during one of the public comments? And that is a question, I think, for probably staff to say, is this a typical amount of time that we have? There really is almost 5 weeks between each of these walkthroughs that we're saying are optional, and though I completely agree with Alderman Rainey that they should be mandatory, do we need them to be so widely spaced apart? I mean, we could speed up this process by having them a little bit closer together. So that's a question that I have is do we need this much time, or can we shorten the process and make this move forward a little bit more quickly?
Okay, thank you, Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Fleming?
Actually, I had the same comment in terms of the timeline. If we could look at shortening the timeline, I think that the gentleman was correct with end-of-the-year giving for nonprofits. And so if we have a nonprofit who we know needs to raise a lot of money, it might be nice for them to have access to the building towards the end of the year for some kind of fundraising event.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson?
I think what would probably be fair to all of us and to the public as well is have these changes incorporated into the document and come back at the next meeting. I do agree. I think we should make attendance at one of the meetings, not all of them, obviously. You don't have to attend all the walkthroughs. You don't have to attend, but at one of the pre-proposal conferences and one of the walkthroughs. But yeah, if we can kind of compress those walkthrough schedule a little bit and maybe get it dialed in so that we have a decision maybe by beginning of December. I realize it's not, tons of time on the holiday season, but at least, if the submission is done well in advance, preparations could be made and they could get that stuff out before the end of the year, with at least a month to get the, end of the year giving, into the queue.
By second meeting of November.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that we can have a decision by December, by start of December.
So just so I understand, Alderman Wilson, you're suggesting then shortening up the due date, is that right?
Yes.
Right. Just kind of compressing the schedule. I think the most room for compression would probably come in this optional walkthrough period. So if we shorten that up a bit, we can bring in the last day to submit questions, bring that up maybe a month. The due date would be roughly a month sooner, and the award would be a month sooner, or late November.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think it'd be helpful if we could work backwards from a deadline date. So currently, we're proposing November 20th. Are you thinking a month earlier than that, which would be perhaps the 29th of, I'm sorry, I'll make sure I got my months correct here. So that's a Monday, the 20th of November. So are you thinking like the 23rd of October, the 16th of October, the 30th of October?
How many?
Middle of the month.
Four weeks would be the 23rd.
What is the two council dates in November are what?
The 13th and the 27th. Actually, we'll probably meet on the 20th as well, depending on your...
Because of the budget.
Because of the budget.
Right. So maybe let's aim to have these submissions in time for introduction at that first November meeting, the 13th.
Okay, so then I would...
Action the following meeting.
So then I would suggest that if we're going to do this, it would be the 2nd or the 9th of October to give us a month to process.
Yes. Well, the optional walkthrough time period is 10 weeks, so I think we might be able to shorten those. Find, as Alderman Wilson said, find the time in those 10 weeks to shorten it.
Well, we will have cut 4 then. I mean, if you'd like to go further...
But recapture the time in that.
Sure, that's
just work
fine.
backwards.
I mean, we can reconfigure based on whatever the final date is.
Okay.
Appropriate.
I think Alderman Fisk has something she wants to add, and then I'm going to go to Alderman Rue Simmons and then Alderman Rainey.
Oh, I'm sorry. Robin, did you want to go ahead?
Sure. I agree with Alderman Ravel's revisions. I would also like to be sure that we, and also moving up the timeline as well. In addition, specific language about protecting the gardens. I don't know if this RFP could have an option to protect the gardens, or how we deal with that. I think that it should be mandated that there is some protection. So I would like to see language in there about that, and I would like to see a strategic plan, as was mentioned by one of the public comments, for inclusion.
Right.
Okay. Alderman Fisk?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to argue against expanding the timeline, only because if we're going to all the effort to go out for an RFP and reach perhaps nonprofits that we haven't reached before, decisions by those not-for-profits are going to be made by their boards. And not every board meets every week or every 2 weeks. They may meet once a month, and it's going to take them a little bit of time to first of all, come see the house, figure out how much it needs, how much they can do, and I'd rather get it right than rush it. And given that if this doesn't work, if this RFP doesn't work, then we're looking at not good scenarios for the house. I'd rather give the house the best chance that it has to find just the right nonprofit that can afford to renovate the house and really make it work for the next however many years that we grant them a lease. So I would say, in fairness to these, whoever the not-for-profits are out there, that we give them the time that they need to make a decision. And if we're rushing them, then we'll probably be cutting down on the number of responses, and maybe very good responses, that we might be able to attract.
Thank you, Alderman Fisk. Alderman Rainey?
Well, I was going to suggest that we do the walkthrough and the pre-bids one and one together in close proximity to each other, so that we can get them over with. I don't see why there's any reason to spread these out. In other words, have walkthrough one and pre-bid one within a week of each other, and then walkthrough two and pre-bid two. I mean, why would we do that?
So
that people could get on with
Yeah.
deciding whether or not they want to do a proposal.
Right. I'll just chime in here, because I was the one that had suggested that in my edits. I think we have a wonderful opportunity with this mansion on the lake. I do think that we need to give the marketplace adequate time, and what that means is, it means we need to get out there and we need to market this opportunity that we are willing to, in essence, gift this mansion, but bring us your ideas, and they need to be for public use and everything else. And that's an effort on our part, and I'm concerned that if we just did this and said, okay, the mandatory pre-proposal meeting is 3 weeks from now or a month from now, and the walkthrough is right after that. If we don't have it, if we're not offering it again, 2 months from now, that's what I agree with Alderman Fisk that we ought to give an adequate amount of time, because I really do feel like this process has been around for a long, long time. This is our last bite at the apple if we have said, no, we won't accept private investment in that mansion to try and save the mansion. So I had suggested that, Alderman Rainey, and that's why I put I suggested a time difference. I still think it may be too much between August 21st and October 24th. I think the October 24th could be the beginning of October.
All right, but I still want it mandatory. If
Yeah,
you're
the
going to present a proposal, you've got to go to.
Yeah. The other discussion I think we need to have is, if we are asking someone to come forward, whether it's the Evanston Lake House and Garden Group or some other nonprofit that comes forward, and they're going to put millions and millions of dollars into this mansion, what sort of ownership rights of the actual building itself do they have? Meaning, can they transfer it? Same function and everything else. Can they transfer it? Or are we asking, a nonprofit to come here, put millions of dollars into this mansion, and the mansion remains 100% under the control of the city? meaning we can, we say, sign a 20-year lease, it's ours after 20 years. I just think we have to be really smart and strategic about the amount of money that someone is going to be putting into this mansion and what rights they have to the actual building itself. Alderman Fisk?
And I think that's a good point, but that will be covered under the lease. So any type of commercial lease, for example, I'm sure your lease says if there's going to be a transfership of the lease, that's going to be subject to review and acceptance by the property owner. And that's certainly something that can be written into the lease. I just want to make sure that we are offering this opportunity to as many and as broad a range of nonprofits as we can. And I absolutely agree with you that this is definitely our last bite of the apple, and we do want to get it right. But I think a lot of those details can be worked out as we're going through the lease. When we look at the bigger picture, I just don't think it's a great idea to be too restrictive in the RFP that we're sending out, because we'll discourage responses.
Thank you. Alderman Ravel?
There was just one little word that I wanted clarification on. It's under scope of services after the bullets. It's at the end of that next paragraph where it says, additionally, for-profit uses are prohibited.
What page?
So,
What page are you on?
Page 45.
Page 5.
Page 5.
Are you on yours, or are you in the packet one?
It's 45 in the packet, but it's page 5 of the other document.
Got it.
So additionally, for-profit uses are prohibited. So are we understanding that if the bidder is a nonprofit by definition, then are all the uses that they're likely to put into the building going to be seen as not-for-profit, even if it's a light fare cafe, for example, that's obviously generating revenues for the property? Because if not, then we need to clarify that, because I think it's quite likely that any nonprofit that's going into the building would be having some kinds of uses there that would be generating revenues.
That's a good point. Alderman Fisk?
Well, I'm thinking to, the Botanic Garden, a bookstore, or a souvenir shop, or whatever. I think when you start talking about a cafe, you're talking about a totally different use that is maybe not relevant to the non-for-profit use, and I guess I'd refer us to the the Internal Revenue Service.
Okay. I mean, the Lakefront Master Plan does specifically mention a cafe at Lighthouse.
I'm aware of that, but that's another discussion, I think.
But I do think I think it's important, because if we're going to give, and hopefully this conversation and the final RFP is going to give direction to people that are potentially going to bid on this, and that includes the Evanston Lake House and Garden Group. I do think we need to have some clarification. Is a cafe, are we saying a cafe is absolutely restricted and prohibited, or is it allowed? I mean, this nonprofit is going to be doing two things. A, do I have the capital investment to put in to improve the mansion? And B, do I have an operational plan that is feasible, that is going to generate, break even or generate some kind of, profit that we continue to invest into the property? Alderman Nguyen. And then we'll go to Alderman Wilson.
2 points. First, when we originally signed a long-term lease with Carvalho Montessori School, one of their concerns was because they were planning, the building was not in particularly good condition. They were planning to put a lot of money in, and ultimately, in the first lease term that we had with them, they put $2 million into the building. We signed a 25-year lease with 2 15-year extensions with them. So that's one way in which that we can provide some assurances to whoever the winning bidder is here, that they would have control over it. And there were transfer provisions in that lease as well. So we have experience with that. Then as to the second issue about the not-for-profit or status, I do think that's the question of what does the Botanic Garden, I'm sure it doesn't lose its not-for-profit status by having a cafe and a bookshop there. That would be just a question for the legal staff to figure out, if whatever the bidder is who wins, if they sell T-shirts, are they permitted to do that? So I think that would be something that I'd like to get the legal department to give us an answer on. I mean, does that jeopardize their not-for-profit status, or if we permitted them to have a light fare cafe, what does that do?
Okay.
Or do we have to modify the language here in order to allow that?
All right. Alderman Wilson?
And I'm not as worried about the for-profit preclusion. It doesn't preclude them from generating revenue. There's a distinction between generating revenue and something that's for-profit. So there's nothing in here that says you can't generate revenue. So if they had a, whatever it is, souvenir shop, cafe, whatever it is that they're operating to generate revenue, that's fine. It just can't be a company that's locating itself in there, for a profit, like a Starbucks or a McDonald's or something. It has to be something pertinent to the nonprofit use and for the nonprofit purposes.
Alderman Fisk?
Yeah, I think we may be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. I think maybe we can have this discussion, but I do want to go on record, because I've been on record on this a number of times and talked to you, my colleagues, a number of times about this too, is that I think when the Lakefront Master Plan was written in 2008, we were thinking about, wouldn't it be nice to have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine down on the lakefront? And in 2008, that would have been a really good idea. Since then, we've had some inquiries for running restaurants on the lakefront. And I'm very concerned about that. I'm extremely concerned about what that might portend for neighborhoods, for the lakefront itself, for traffic, for trash, for parking, for a number of different things. I can't support a restaurant use on the lakefront, even in Harley Clark. First of all, I don't think it's a moneymaker, and secondly, I think times have changed, and I would not want to see a restaurant use because it's not fulfilling, perhaps, the financial goals of the not-for-profit. I wouldn't like to see that expand, because I think that creates a precedent for the lakefront that I think would be a mistake. And so I'm going to be very, very, very particular about this, and just, again, wanted to share that with you, but I do think that's putting the cart before the horse.
Okay, that was a robust conversation about the Harley Clark Mansion. Now, one of the things that was raised in public comment that we didn't talk about, and again, I don't know if we just want to remain silent, they were asking that the city not remain silent, was in regards to the $250,000 that the council had, I guess, previously allotted. Alderman Wilson?
And going back in time to when we had those conversations, it was 100% certain in my mind that the purpose of the money was to maintain the property. In other words, to keep the building stabilized. If there were recreational opportunities that run by the city, that would certainly have been an option, but that does not seem to be a realistic possibility. So in my mind, it wasn't to be given to a bidder. It was to maintain the property until such time as somebody comes forward to use the property. So that's what my thought is, and I think that's why it's not addressed in the RFP, because it's not a donation for the project.
Okay.
It's for us to maintain the building, to make sure it doesn't go to waste in the meantime.
All right. Okay. So if there's no more, did you have something, City Manager?
Just looking for some clarification. So from the discussion, I think what we'll do is we'll take all of the comments. I think there were 3 areas that I heard some disagreeing, which I'd like to get some additional clarification. But otherwise, we'll take the comments that we heard this evening, we'll incorporate that into a new version. And if it's all right with the council, then we would come back on the 24th for final approval. Is that the consensus of the group? So there were 3 areas that I didn't hear agreement on. The first area was the date that it would be due. We were alluding to perhaps the beginning of October. Mr. Mayor, if that's the consensus of the body, then, the options I would think would be, October 2nd, October 9th as dates. And then we would come back with the revised on the 24th with a schedule that matches that date.
So I would make a motion that we make the due date October 9th with the intention of putting the council in a position to make a final decision before December.
Second.
Okay, because it's an RFP, do we need to take a roll? We're going to go.
Whatever you prefer.
Let's go ahead and take a roll, City Clerk, on that motion.
It's not a final
action.
action. It's just a draft. It's a working draft, so.
It's up to you.
Yeah. Oh. All right, so all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. All right.
The second area I'm not clear on is the MBE, WBE language. I think that there was a desire that I heard to adjust it a little bit, and there were some discussions on that, but there was also a desire to clearly state what the policy of the city in this area is. So if that's the direction, we can do both. I think we can adjust it, the language, and we can also either put as an attachment or somehow otherwise refer to the city's existing policy for all projects. Is that sufficient?
Yes.
Okay.
And could I guess if I could expand on that slightly. It's fine. We're good.
All right.
I'll be laboring the point.
So Ms. Storley will redraft the language based on the discussion, but we'll also include the specific statement of the city's policy on MBEWB. Is that clear? Okay. The last piece then is the piece that you were just referring to, and that is this question of use. My sense from the discussion is that there's the issue of use that a nonprofit can lawfully do under their nonprofit status, and then I think there is a use that you just don't want. And so I think it's important to express to these folks what you don't want. So if you don't want a coffee shop, I think you need to specifically say that. If you don't want a type 1 or type 2 restaurant, I think you need to specifically state that. Because otherwise, the reality is that those will be income generators. And for any group that wants to propose, they're going to see that as a key element. And so I think the council needs to say, is it in or is it out?
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, thank you, City Manager. I would like to comment on that. Like Alderman Fisk, I have always been adamant that we not have a full-service restaurant along the lakefront. I do think that the Lakefront Master Plan did contemplate a light fare cafe here, and that would be acceptable to me, but not a full-service restaurant, because I do have very serious concerns that is a precedent. And I think I want to make it explicitly clear that the Lakefront Master Plan contemplated this and only this as the location for a cafe along the lakefront. So that would be acceptable to me.
And I would agree with that.
Are there any objections? So a light fare cafe, and we will do.
Yeah, Alderman Fisk.
Sorry, I knew it would come to this. A light fare cafe is not going to make money. I think that's we need to realize that that's going to be an amenity to attracting people to come to the house, but it's not going to be a moneymaker. And my concern is, if that's not clearly stated, that the folks that are interested in perhaps making it a moneymaker are, when they realize that it isn't going to be raising the revenue, that they're going to ask for an expansion. And by that point, it's going to be out of our control, and I'm concerned about that. So I would hope that whoever the organization is, that they reach out to the Evanston restaurateurs that have come and spoken to us in the past, who have assured the City Council that this is not going to be making money for any nonprofit.
Alderman Ravel?
Well, I know that at least one coffee shop owner came to one of our planning committee meetings to discuss whether he would envision this as a feasible location for a light fare cafe. And it's not going to be a huge moneymaker, but he indicated that he thought that could be a very viable location for, coffees, gelatos, bringing in some food prepared elsewhere, that he would be very interested. So I certainly don't think we're looking at huge revenues there, but some support.
Okay. All right.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think there then is consensus for light fare cafe only, and that we would state that as part of the language of the RFP. All right. So then we will come back on the 24th with a revised copy based on these discussions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, that takes care of one order of special business. We will now move on to the second order, and I think some of these will go quicker. The second order that we're going to talk about tonight, based on public comment, is SP 6, which is the Cook County Minimum Wage and Sick Leave Ordinances, and the next steps. The intent here is just to give some direction to the city staff on any ideas or thoughts that people up here at the dais have, and we'll direct the city manager to develop an action plan and return to the City Council on September 18th with a status report. I have two suggestions here. One is I think it's really, really important that we offer as a city a workshop to businesses here in Evanston, along with the expert at Cook County to understand the new ordinance. There's a lot of nuances to this, and you heard Commissioner Sufferton the other day speak to us. And I've spoken to business owners here in Evanston since then. There's particularly a lot of concern more on the sick leave and the calculation of that. And so my suggestion would be, actually, and this is before September 18th, later this month, that city staff, city manager, work with the county and arrange a workshop, and we promote that for businesses so that they can communicate, concerns they have over that, and we can make sure people all understand the rules, because the general consensus is business owners want to comply, obviously, with the rules and regulations. They're concerned right now because it's just uncertainty on their part. Second thing is I'm really pleased, along with Alderman Braithwaite and Alderman Rue Simmons, that a partnership has been formed with the Chamber of Commerce to take a look at the less than $20,000 spend here in the city of Evanston, and this is something that came up through the Meeby Weeby EB committee of the city. And so, real quickly, there's $13 million that the city spends under $20,000. $2 million of that is spent on Evanston-based businesses. There's another $7.6 million spent in Illinois, and then another $3.4 million spent outside of Illinois. And along with the chamber, there's been a partnership formed that it will start in the next week or two, where we will have someone from the chamber loan to the city to help work on identifying that $7.6 million spend and what more we can do, so some more of that money can be spent here in Evanston, and the chamber will be out promoting it as well. So I think that's something that we can do to support our business community, and really happy with the work of Alderman Braithwaite and Alderman Rue Simmons to push that forward, and of course the Chamber of Commerce, and we have Linda Tukes-Larkin here today, who's the executive director, and working with the city closely on that. So with that, let me turn it over to Alderman Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I think you summed up my comments. Over the last couple of weeks, and even moving into the last Friday meeting, I've heard from a number of businesses, both on the retail side as well as from our industrial area. So I would encourage our staff to host this meeting, and I think it should be collaborative with our economic development. I like the idea of being able to hear from our Cook County Commissioner. And the one regret that I did have on the last Friday, we really didn't listen to our business community. And I can't speak for all of them, but the ones who have reached out, particularly Tom Ward, I think they just want to be heard. So I'm willing to give up time if it's on maybe even a Saturday morning to do that. I would love to be able to do it sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you. Any other discussion? Would you like to come up for a second, Linda?
I don't know if is that appropriate.
Well, I guess I get to I'll call the roll, so you can have 2 minutes, okay?
Thank you. On July 27th, the Evanston Chamber has invited a member from the Cook County Commission to come and speak at the Rotary at 6 p.m., and I wanted to let all of you know, and I will get this out to the city. We're going to blast it out from the Chamber tomorrow, July 27th, 6 p.m. at the Rotary in there.
27th or 22nd?
July 27th.
That's great.
Good.
That's great. Thank you very much for your leadership. Is there a time on that, Linda?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. Okay. Are you okay with the city also promoting that? I mean, thank you. Thank you. Okay. City manager staff will make sure they work with you on that. Alderman Rainey.
Well, I was going to say, before the city expends any effort and staff time and money on a workshop to help local businesses with the sick time issue, I think we really ought to meet with the county to see if they can rework the sick time provision of the ordinance. It's a mess, and everybody says it is. And I think that's where the work needs to be done. I mean, people don't understand, the administrative part, it's crazy. So, I mean, I don't see why we should help fix something that is so broken when it's their ordinance. That's my suggestion.
Okay. Any other comments on this? Or we'll move on to the next. Okay, Alderman Fleming.
I just had a question. So in reading the packet, it says assist Evanston minimum wage workers and their employers, but your suggestions, the two things you suggested are more for the employers?
Yeah, mine were. That wasn't meant to exclude the employees. That was just two ideas that were on the top of my mind, so yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So nothing.
So this conversation includes employees too, if we want to have that conversation too. I mean, I think affordable housing has been something that we talked about at our strategic planning session, and something we may want to give city staff direction of and want more of a plan come September on that, for instance.
All right, and so I guess I would suggest in this business workshop or some other venue that we do talk to the businesses about the issue that this gentleman brought up in terms of if there are going to be some layoffs or some reduction in hours due to the minimum wage, that we can be, I don't have a suggestion for that, but that's something we ask our business owners so that we are aware of if our good intentions do then maybe cause someone to lose their job or half-time or whatever that might be, that we can start brainstorming how to rectify that.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Rainey.
The only housing you can afford at $10 an hour is a room at the Y, or unless you have a voucher. So, I mean, let's get real here.
Okay.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll come back on September 18th with reports on these activities as well as some additional initiatives.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, next special order that we're going to discuss is SP4, water service shutoff for non-payment process. Staff recommends the City Council accept and place on file this report on the water shutoff for non-payment process implemented by the City of Evanston and provide direction for next steps. The action is for action, accept and place on file. Is there any discussion on SP4?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is an item that came up as far as a referral to staff. We provide the City Council regularly with a list of shutoffs. I think many of you have noticed that these lists continue to be substantial. We have some existing plans in which we work with residents, and Darrell King, our Water Production Bureau Chief from the Public Works Agency, is here. He and his staff are the ones that coordinate these matters, and he's here with a brief report.
Great. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Clerk Reed, members of the City Council. Darrell King, Water Production Bureau Chief, Public Works Agency. Here to talk to you tonight about water shutoffs for non-payment, those procedures. So utility billing, the City of Evanston's utility bill consists of charges for water, sewer, sanitation services provided to a property. Utility service charges are billed bi-monthly every 2 months, beginning in January of each year. Regarding water turn-on fees, there are fees associated with that. During business hours, that fee is $25. And outside of business hours, the fee is $75. As a note, no such discontinuation of water service shall be made between 5:00 p.m. Thursday and 8:00 a.m. On Monday, and that's a way to allow property owners to come in on Friday and make payments, make arrangements, different things of that nature, as well as to assist with their water not being off on the weekends. Delinquent notifications. The first notice appears on the bi-monthly utility service bill, indicating a balance forward past due amount, including applied penalties. And the second notice is delivered a few days following the billing due date. The final shutoff notice is mailed 2 weeks prior to the scheduled shutoff date. The final notice does not include information about payment options or qualifying for emergency assistance. And in an effort to notify tenants in multifamily and commercial properties, each entrance is posted with a yellow notice indicating the intent to terminate water services due to delinquency and the tenant's rights. There are cases where the tenants are unaware of any notices for delinquency in payments or shut-off proceedings. Continuing with delinquent notifications, just water shut-off stats. We have 14,400 water accounts here in the city of Evanston. Shut-off letters mailed, and these stats represent our current or previous shut-off cycle. Shut-off letters mailed, 397 were mailed. Notices posted to multifamily and commercial properties, 103. Shut-off list as of Friday, June 23rd, 202 accounts were on that list. Shut-off list as of Tuesday, June 27th, 124 accounts remained on the shut-off list, and that's in large part to property owners coming in paying, whether it be online or to the collector's office in person to pay or establish arrangements. Total shutoffs that occurred were 107, and properties that were still off as of July 6th were 13 properties. Of those 13 properties, 8 at that time were verified as vacant. 3 of the vacant were vacant for sale. So that left 5 properties remaining at that time. We did reach out to each one of those properties through various communications in person, as well as phone calls and emails if we had that information on record. Two properties came in and paid, and their water was turned back on. And as of now, the 3 remaining properties are vacant. So that was that breakdown there. Assistance programs. Payment plans are managed by the collector's office, and there are 2 separate types of payment plans, one prior to the water being shut off and another after the water has been shut off. Emergency assistance is managed through the Health and Human Services Department. General assistance also through the Health and Human Services Department, and budget billing is not available. Outreach through a collaborative effort between the collector's office and the Health and Human Services Department. That department will provide outreach to families when they're aware of a situation or a need for emergency assistance, advocacy for possible payment arrangements, as well as financial literacy are offered. Water service responsibility. If the consumer of water whose bill is unpaid is not the owner of the premises, and the city manager or his or her designee or other officer of the city has notice of this fact, a notice stating that such bill remains unpaid for a period of 30 days after it has been rendered shall be mailed to the owner of the premises at his or her last known address. So there could be instances where there's a lease, and in that lease it states that the tenant is responsible. If the tenant does not honor that lease agreement, ultimately the property owner we'll get that final bill and possible lien against the property.
Hey, Daryl, Alderman Braithwaite has a question.
Can you go one slide back? And I've tried to be patient, but you mentioned the outreach. And so at any part of this, is there any medical reasons? Or because I'm glad to see that it's a small number. I mean, we're less than 400 for a town of 80,000. So is there something, I think it's one more slide back with the outreach. So if someone has a medical condition or whatever the case may be, is there anything within your system or policies that would allow for their water service to continue under any medical conditions, whatever that would be?
I think as long as we're made aware of a situation that's going on, it may be someone on dialysis or something.
Right.
You know, I think communication just has to occur.
So you have the flexibility to manage that.
Yeah, I think things are case by case. I don't believe that everything has to be absolute all the time.
In a situation where it's a tenant and the landlord isn't paying for it, you're able to make adjustments there as well, correct?
So
if someone's a tenant and the landlord is responsible for the water, and just for whatever reason the landlord hasn't paid the water bill, that's happened in my ward. So I'm just asking, so the tenants can come in, speak to you, and then you're working with a landlord versus just cutting off the water.
Absolutely. As long as communication is being made back and forth and we're aware of it, then case by case.
Okay.
Definitely. Okay. So a notice stating that such bill remains unpaid, and we're still talking, but no, I think I touched on that one.
Daryl, Clerk Reed had a quick question for you.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Daryl. I'm just curious, at what point does the collector's office notify the Human Services Department, Chris Fouché, for example, that there is someone that potentially is in need of emergency assistance or general assistance? Is it after the water is shut off? Is it 30 days prior? At what point is that triggered?
So typically, especially once the notices begin to get triggered and a property owner receives that notice, they probably, or there have been instances where they come in or contact and they start that communication, that dialogue, and say, hey, this is what's going on, and they request assistance. What are the options available to me? And then if it's an option that maybe is beyond a payment plan and it's a bit more extreme, then that case would be transferred over to the Health and Human Services Department.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, there isn't an automatic process where you guys see, and I asked this because when I started my campaign for clerk, the clerk was the city collector, and so this is something I had thought about. So is it, there isn't an automatic, it's when a resident says, hey, I need some help, there's an automatic sending over to the Health and Human Services saying, hey, this person might need some help to reach out to them. There isn't.
Excuse me, Clerk Reed. Yes, when it goes to collection, the General Assistance Office is notified. So they don't have to necessarily come in and say, I want to go and talk. If they're going into shut-off, then we will notify GA as well. Now, that doesn't mean GA is reaching out to them and saying, can we help? It's still on the resident to come and say, I would like help.
Okay.
Alderman Fleming?
I have a couple questions. So one, I think, falls in line with, well, anyway, the question is about the payment plan. You mentioned that when the second notice goes out, there is no reference to an available payment plan. And so is the assumption that I get the bill and I'm past due and I call you and ask you if there is a payment plan? Is there a reason that we don't just put it on the bill that there is payment plan options, call this number?
I've looked into that question, and it's more past practice. I haven't really gotten a clear, definitive, this is absolutely why that information has not or does not appear on any of the notices.
Yeah.
It's been more opinion. So as of right now, I think it's just something that's happened past practice throughout the years.
Okay.
So
Well, can we look at
clear.
new practice where we could put it on the bill to say, call this number for a payment arrangement or what have, I don't know what the language says, but I don't think there's any reason for us not to let people know that there's a payment option.
I think it's something, that we can look at.
And then my second question is, so people come into the the collector's office to make those payment arrangement plans with someone in the collector's office. And so it's my understanding our collector's office is open 8:30 to 5 o'clock, and there is not currently someone who speaks Spanish in there. And so that might be something we want to think about if we have people who aren't able to pay their bills and work a 9-to-5 job, cannot get to our collectors to make those arrangements, or if they speak Spanish and cannot have interpretation services down there. I just think we want to be mindful of those limitations.
Okay.
Alderman Nguyen?
Yes, Mr. King, you mentioned that we don't have budget billing. Has that ever been examined as to whether that would be a useful option to have here in Evanston, to have budget billing, or is it that the water bill is fairly standard throughout the year, so it's not as necessary? I mean, what's the thought behind not having budget billing?
We recently participated in a survey that surveyed about 26 or so different communities, and all communities except for 2 offered payment plans and no mention of budget billing. 2 communities did not offer anything. I think budget billing is something, the gas utility, they offer those sorts of things. And I think it just would need to be dialogue amongst staff and to dig more into that as to why is it something that we can do or not. In the year and a half that I've been here, I haven't had conversation about it, just only about the 2 payment plans that we have that exist. But that's something that I believe staff can internally talk about and see, is there a reason why or why not?
Right. Well, I'd like to know, is it worthwhile for the city or the citizens of Evanston to have a budget billing process for the water department for their water bill? It might be that economically it's not the best thing to do, but I'd just like to know what the information looks like on that issue, and also if our shutoffs meet a standard of what you would trigger a community to have budget billing. Whether given the number of shutoffs we have, is it high enough or not high enough so that we would go to the administrative effort of putting in budget billing. So. Okay.
And Alderman Nguyen, members of the council, I think would like to take a little bit more time to look at that. I think the point.
I'm not expecting an answer.
Sure. But I think we will commit this evening to come back to the council this fall with a little bit more investigation on that. I think the point you raised regarding administrative costs is a real one, and I think we just need to try to do our best to quantify. To the question regarding payment plans, I think we can look to add language to that. I think one of the things we just need to be very careful of is to manage the flexibility that we have with our customers. That for those that are in the greatest need, we absolutely want to try to do, and I think Daryl has described what's been very good past practice of dealing with it on a case-by-case basis. If any resident comes in and says, I want to do this because your terms are better than my bank's terms, then I think that's an issue that we need to be mindful of. And I think one of the reasons that we've not gone out of our way to offer anyone who comes to us that option is that many people who are often, and I know you all see the shutoff list, that there are many businesses in town who use this as a finance mechanism. And I think that we just need to be going into that, recognizing that that's a part of this, and is that a policy decision that the City Council wants to make. So why don't we, I think we can certainly put language in the bill the next time we have the ability to change the language, and then report back to you to see how much of that. I don't want to not do it fearful of consequences. I just want to make the council aware that consequence exists. We'll go ahead and do it, and if we see that it is being abused in any way, we'll come back. But give us until, probably sometime in the first part of October to come back. We can talk more about budget billing.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Do we have anything else for Darrell?
And Mr. Mayor, while Mr. King is still here, and maybe Mr. Stonebeck is somewhere nearby, the other utility that we also get information from is Commonwealth Edison. There's also been some discussion among members of the council as to what we can do to be helpful to those folks in need. We're still working with Commonwealth Edison to develop a plan that would either encourage them to reach out on their own through the company, or perhaps allow us to reach out with similar kinds of options. Mr. Stonebeck has been working with ComEd longer than I have. My sense is the numbers that we see from ComEd of folks that are looking to have their power shut off are similar numbers over a period of time, and my sense is that they get turned on and probably in the same orders of magnitude that Mr. King described, people getting their water once they get a final notice. But is that a fair assessment?
That is correct. And in talking to Commonwealth Edison, they are making sure that they're going to provide Evanston with their latest information about plans that they offer, and then they clearly indicate it would be okay for us to make that available to the people that are on their shut-off list.
So I think what we have to do is we have to decide, that list is maybe a little over 100, 150.
I don't think it's quite that large.
Okay. So I think it's just a matter, is that an administrative task that we're prepared to take on for Commonwealth Edison customers within the city of Evanston? So I think we're still looking at that, and we'll come back to the council. If we can come up with a relatively cost-effective way to make that information available, we'll do that. But in the meantime, we'll look at on the water side, the budget billing and the monitor the payment plan issue.
Alderman Rainey?
Yeah. One thing that I would like when we come back with this additional information, I think we're going to find out also that it's not going to be worthwhile to do budget plans because there's not that great a fluctuation, like you said. Like in the winter, our gas bills are way high, and in the summer, they're way low. So that's why budget plans work. But I would like you to bring back to us the number, like for the 12 months or the 6 billing periods, the actual number of shut-offs that we actually do, because I think it's very, very low, which is great. Secondly, in the case of Commonwealth Edison, several years ago, I'm the one that asked for the shut-offs for ComEd. We never got them. In fact, we were told that we couldn't have them because it was confidential, and then all of a sudden we got them. There is a great distinction between regulations between municipal water and Commonwealth Edison and NICOR. They are governed by the Illinois Commerce Commission because they're public utilities, and the water is not. We can just willy-nilly turn people off whenever we want, more or less. But the electric and gas cannot be. They are governed months and temperature-wise, et cetera, whereas we do not have those controls. So there's right? Is that correct?
That is correct,
Yeah.
but we do not shut off during the winter.
And we are much nicer than those who are governed by, but it is true that we are not governed by the Illinois Commerce Commission.
That is correct.
So, Mr. Mayor,
But we are nicer.
Thank you. We'll come back. Thank you, Mr. King. We'll come back to you in a month or two with further update.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Darrell. Okay. Next order of special business, we will go with Capital Improvement Program Planning, SP1. Okay, staff's going to present a summary of the capital improvement planning and seek our feedback or the council's feedback on setting future goals.
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as Ms. Biggs comes forward, SB1, SB2, SB3 really are all interrelated. I think the larger theme of these next three items is where are we with both our operating and capital budget, and where are we going as we begin planning for fiscal 18. As you know from the agenda packet, we have some concerns concerns on the operating side, which we'll get to shortly, but we also have serious concerns on the capital side. And what we want to try to do tonight is sort of give you a state of affairs where we are with the current year. Ms. Biggs is going to give you a very broad overview of where we think we are by category coming up in 2018 and beyond. But it's fair to say that we do not have sufficient resources to address the capital needs of Evanston within our current framework of funding. And that's something we're very concerned about. We're not going to spend a lot of time listing large numbers that there's no way to fund, but at the same time, we really want to bring, some key areas to your attention, because as the council begins to think about budget issues for 2018 and beyond, and as significant as some of the operating issues may end up being for us, that does not diminish in any way the importance and the severity of some of the capital issues that we have. So I wanted to kind of just give that preamble. We'll start with the capital overview, and then we'll move on to the operating side. Ms. Biggs, the city engineer, is here. Good evening.
Hello, Mayor Haggerty, City Clerk, and honored members of the City Council. My name is Laura Biggs. I'm the Bureau Chief of Capital Planning. So tonight, I'm going to start with the project status update, as City Manager referred to. So this year, we budgeted the capital program at $58.3 million. As of tonight, assuming that the contracts that are capital funded on the agenda are actually approved, we're at $29.8 million. It would be unusual to award all $58.3 million just because sometimes projects get delayed for things out of our control. So we are actually moving along briskly with our capital program for this year. We have 3 projects over $1 million that really are not yet awarded, and a large number of smaller projects as well. These are the treated water storage replacement, the Fleetwood Jourdain HVAC electrical, and the Howard Street Theater project. So just going through some of our major projects that we have under construction now, I just wanted to give a brief update. The Sheridan Road, Chicago Avenue project was shut down by IDOT by the state budget impasse, but we have received notice that we can start work again. That's a very complex project, so the contractor is putting together a schedule for mobilization that they're submitting to us in the next day or two. I will say that the first part of the project that was supposed to be done with Chicago Avenue, that got done pretty much on schedule. The second part that was supposed to be done from Chicago Avenue to Lincoln Street on Sheridan Road was very aggressively planned to try to be complete by September 15th. We will probably experience a 2 to 4 week delay because of the state shutdown, so it is unlikely that we will meet that. However, we will probably get that done in 2017 per the plan, and we've notified Northwestern and we're working with them. And then we will proceed to the final section northward in 28 per the plan. Emerson Ridge Green Bay actually was shut down also by the state budget impasse, although they're doing very little work right now. The only thing that remains on Emerson Ridge Green Bay is some punch list items, and also we had a change order to design a mast arm signage to clarify directions going northbound on Ridge and Green Bay at the intersection. That is still to be delivered. That had a long lead time. So that will be installed later this summer, and we should be finishing out the punch list. Fountain Square, if we think of it in 2 parts, the southern part has had a lot of work done on it, and that's currently on schedule. There's been a lot of underground work that's occurred. We've been working on sidewalk and curbs and a lot of other things, but the northern section north of Davis, where the current plaza is, there have been some delays. They are not out of schedule yet, but it's likely that they are not going to meet the schedule for finishing that this year. The lead time for the Veterans Memorial and the fountain had a long lead time, but it's even longer than we anticipated. And there actually have been some underground utility issues with some ComEd ducts, very major ComEd ducts that are in the way, a lot of minor underground utility issues that have caused some delays. So we're monitoring it. We are going to have everything buttoned up for the winter. We're probably not going to do construction over the winter, but the construction may continue into the spring. Fleetwood Jourdain has 2 projects scheduled this year. A small project, restroom improvements, was approved by the council for construction. That construction scheduled to start in August, sort of in the slow time for Fleetwood Jourdain at the end of summer. And then there's an HVAC and electrical project that is quite large, and when we received the bids, it was substantially over budget, and we only received 1 bid. So that project is going to be rebid. We've made some changes to the contract to try to simplify the bidding for contractors, and we also did not bid it at a great time of year. And so the bids are going to be re-advertised in late July for construction this winter. The service center is a non-budgeted project that we've been dealing with. There have been some structural issues at the service center. Basically, 6 areas in some of the garage bays that are under the parking deck at the service center have had areas that are identified where we're having structural insufficiencies in the beams. And so those areas have been shored at this point, and the service center is temporarily all safe. We are working with an engineer, Wisgeni Engineering, that is a structural specialist, and they're preparing a proposal to do what their fees would be to do the final design of the fix for these areas. And then our last large project is the treated water storage replacement. This is the replacement of the 5 million gallon underground reservoir that is located at the water treatment plant, and we are currently in design. We've been working with Northwestern University. They are going to install some shoring between their dormitories and our reservoir later this summer. And then we are on track to basically advertise for bid in the winter for a spring start to construction. So those kind of our major projects, large dollar value we have floating out there, or unknown things. If there's any questions associated with those, I'd be happy to answer them. And if not, we can move on. So I thought I would start with just a broad description of how the capital improvement program is structured. We actually have several different areas to the capital improvement program that all bundle up into the citywide CIP, and these are for the most part managed by the Bureau of Capital Planning. So we have our street resurfacing, water main and sewer projects. Those are projects that are occurring within the street right-of-way, basically. Other transportation are sort of an odd collection of miscellaneous street-like projects that involve resurfacing often, things like parking lots, alley improvements, sidewalk. So they tend to be associated with streets and motorists, but they aren't necessarily just street resurfacing. We have a parks CIP. We have water treatment and storage, which is categorized a little bit, water mains in the street resurfacing because it's within the street. These are all the non-street water projects. Our facilities capital, and then in other, we have the library, which is not managed by the Bureau of Capital Planning, and some miscellaneous projects, which includes things like work for police body, funding for police body cameras and things like that that appear in the capital but are also not managed by the Bureau of Capital Planning. So I'm not addressing the library and the miscellaneous in this discussion. They tend to be handled elsewhere, or they're very small. But I put here kind of the numbers we have funded for 2017. Typically, in the last 5 years, the capital improvement program has been more around $35 million, but we do actually have a couple of projects that are skewing it right now. Sheridan Road is around $9 million for just 2017. The Fountain Square project, $6 million. So already you can see just with those 2 projects, we've really boosted the capital. And then there's the revenue side of the business, which is where all the funding comes from. And some of the funding is just sort of wherever we choose to spend it, which are general obligation bonds abated by property tax. But then we have some very specific enterprise funds, the water fund, the sewer fund. Those are basically dedicated to just paying for assets, capital improvement on assets associated with the funds. So they can't really be dragged to other things. You can't spend water fund money on building a building unless somehow that building is related to the water fund revenue. So we have several like that. Motor fuel tax funds have to be designated for specific things. And then we also have geographically designated funds, which come in our tax increment finance districts. And so those also are very specific. So basically, as the capital program is developed, as each project is determined or dreamed up of by an alderman or a staff member or whoever, we're already trying to figure out how we can match the funds with the project. We always try to consider if there's a source that is not a general obligation bond fund, because the general obligation bonds tend to be very limited. We're usually targeting around $9 million a year, and I think our CFO could speak more clearly to that. In past couple years, we've sold bonds at a little bit higher rate, but they are limited, and we do try to be respectful of that. And then projects that are getting outside grants in which the city only has to provide a match, in general, the city council and staff have prioritized at a higher level because we're leveraging our city funds to be able to do a much larger project. So an example of that would be Sheridan Road, where we got a match, and so we are able to do a project, and we did prioritize that. But any project that's not in a TIF area geographically or doesn't use one of these specialty enterprise funds like the parking fund, we basically are relying on general obligation bonds to provide the bulk of the funding. So one of the big questions was, how do we come up with these projects? How does the staff make recommendations for what's going to be in the capital program? And we gather a ton of data, basically, and we try to distill it down into a very specific set of projects for the alderman to review. So we rely on consultants to do outside evaluations where we don't have the capacity in-house. This includes examples would be the pavement condition survey. We repeat this every 5 years. We basically have a company that has specialized equipment drive every road in Evanston and tell us not just what the condition of the surface is, but their equipment can tell us what the condition of the base is and how likely it is to fail. So this was last done in 2013, and we were proposed to do it in 2018, and then we can use that data to help us decide which streets really need to be prioritized. We did a citywide roof assessment last year. We did a park scorecard last year. But then we also do quite a bit of in-house data gathering in order to try to determine where the biggest needs are. So honestly, just the information we get from residents and aldermen about where needs are is a really big driver because there aren't that many staff and there's a lot of residents. So there really are eyes in the field for where there are problems, and we do take that very seriously. Our own staff doing the regular street work will identify problems, and we'll send out an engineer to go do a more detailed inspection when they raise a red flag. We track water main breaks, we track sewer failures, and then we've started doing, in the past couple of years, really detailed facility assessments just in-house, where we gather the facilities maintenance staff, the engineering staff, and the users of each facility together at the table and go methodically through the building system by system. What's the condition of the roof? What's the condition of the HVAC? And really try to make a list of project needs for each facility. And we've done the community centers and some other buildings, but really it's so time intensive that we haven't gotten as far as I would like on that, but we are continuing to do those. And then, per the direction of the City Council several years ago, we really prioritize worst first. We do not prioritize based on geography at all. We really are just specifically looking at what is the most serious failures that are occurring. And we look at safety issues. We look at things like the likelihood of failure versus the impact of failure. And I've listed HVAC as a really good example of this, where we find we're really at the end of the age of useful life for an HVAC system, and when it fails, the community center, if it's in the middle of winter, is going to be without heat. There's a long lead time to fix it. Those are the kinds of projects, what I mean there. And then sometimes just changing regulations are also driving some project decisions. So I've used an example of complete and green streets, and there's the city ordinance, but this is actually a federal regulation and a state regulation as well, that as we do projects on streets, particularly if they involve federal funding, we're required to look at the complete street. And so that's something that has changed the way that we've started to look at how we do street projects. So that's in general how we do it. I would like to go kind of delve into each area a little deeper as to what's going on. So I prepared, try to be consistent in the presentation, this handy little table where I've looked at, this was what we have spent in the last, or what we budgeted in the last 2 years, not necessarily what we spent. So for street, water main, sewer, and other transportation, it's, there's general obligation bonds. There are other funds. I have listed the other fund sources over here. So you can see there's quite a mix. And then the staff has put together an estimate of need by sort of preparing a 5-year CIP. It's totally draft and subject to the council giving us direction on what our priorities are. But so you could see where we stand versus where the staff thinks the greatest needs are, I wanted to be able to provide some data. And so particularly for streets, water, main, and sewer, probably one of our biggest takeaways is here. We do use general obligation bonds, and we use a lot of general obligation bonds. Probably our biggest area of general obligation bond funding, but we also supplement this area with quite a lot of other fund sources. It's a complex area. It deals with a lot of different types of assets, but we also have the option here for getting federal grants, which has allowed us to do some of our larger projects. So within this section, one of our biggest challenges is this idea of balancing repairs versus the proactive maintenance versus the major reconstruction. So a reactive repair is full street resurfacing. The streets fail, the pavement's in terrible condition, drainage doesn't work right. We go in, we adjust the curbs, all the drainage structures, resurface. We probably do 10 or 12 streets a year this way. It's necessary, and for a long time that was basically the only thing we did. We really didn't do a lot of proactive maintenance. We've now moved on to trying to increase our proactive maintenance. I think it's really improved the condition of streets around town, and by that I mean we spend $600,000 a year on street patching. The street isn't totally bad, but there are sections that need repair, and so we go in and we fix just what needs repair. We don't redo the whole street because we try to get to it sooner than that. Sewer lining, when we televise a sewer and we see that it's all cracked and it hasn't failed yet, but it's not looking good, we try to fix it before it fails. And then the major reconstructions, largely these have been paid for a substantial amount by grant funding from federal aid projects, surface transportation programs, CMAP grants, and various things. So in doing that, we've been able to do quite a lot of major reconstructions, but we are struggling to keep up with that. The grant funding is not really adequate for the long pipeline of major street projects that aldermen and residents are requesting, and so we just have been doing them as we can afford them, but it has created a real backlog. Another issue is that for water main replacement, our water revenue that is generated is really not adequate for us to do 1% of the system replacement every year. So we end up bonding some of that, and that gets to be basically, we're doing the same project every year, around $3.5 million, and we end up bonding a portion of it every year because the funding generated by our water rates is not high enough to just cover that. So when we do a water plant project, a lot of times the life cycle of the project is 40 years or more. It's a one-off project, and that's one thing to bond for, but it's another thing when you're just going to do $3.5 million every year in perpetuity, and we're bonding for it every year. It makes less sense. So I have also listed entirely draft the list of proposed projects for 2018. We are not finalized with developing the 2018 CIP yet, and this is entirely subject to City Council looking at it and doing reviews and making recommendations on priorities. But again, I didn't want to leave you hanging with just these random numbers that I put out here. So this is a list of major reconstructions that we have either ongoing like Sheridan Road, or we're proposing to do on Main Street, McDaniel at the West City limit to Pittner, where we're doing a major intersection improvement. And then, again, the other thing to see is that we also have just our annual stuff, MF2 street resurfacing and water main. You can see that, again, we have this balance of GO bonds versus a lot of other funding sources. And there's a lot of other projects listed as well because it's a big area where we spend a lot of money. These are just the projects that are over $500,000. There's other projects as well. So with that, I'll go on to parks to keep this moving. And again, what you see here is the same table. This is the GO bond funding. Here's other funds that have spent. This is all the other funds in this case are TIF for Fountain Square. In parks funding, it's a little bit of an anomaly that there are other funds. Almost all parks are funded by general obligation bonds. And we typically spend $1 to $1.5 million a year on parks projects. When we put together the 5-year CIP, we estimate a basic need level at $4.4 million a year for the next 5 years for parks. Yes.
So what about the scorecard? So does $4.4 million get us through the scorecard?
It includes the parks that are rated F in the scorecard over 5 years.
So DCB.
Not addressed.
Okay.
Parks have been underfunded for a long time, long before I was here. We did look at the park scorecard, and that has been very helpful in identifying a lot of issues. And then there are also some very specific goals that are really not reflected in the park scorecard, but are the realities of what our maintenance staff is dealing with. Playground safety is kind of obvious. There is a safety inspection we do every year, and some playgrounds really are not adequate. And then athletic fields, there are a number of organized athletic leagues in the city, and they are constantly concerned about the quality of the athletic fields, the availability of the athletic fields, and our maintenance staff really cannot even begin to keep up with the athletic field issues. There just needs to be money invested in wholesale regrading of fields and putting in drainage systems and irrigation. And this is similar to what we were doing that was recently approved by council at the James Park North athletic fields to try to address that. So just trying to really deal with F parks, playground safety, athletic fields, in the next 5 years, that is the $4.4 million. It's really not dealing with a lot else. And because the primary source of funding is GO bonds, there really isn't a lot of opportunity for us to figure out other choices. There are not a lot of parks grants out there floating around. We look, and when they are there, they're very small and very limited and not usually what we need. So I have put together next year's list of projects that we would propose, again, entirely draft and subject to City Council recommendations and priorities. The Church Street Harbor South Pier, the wall is crumbling. This was actually budgeted for this year, but because of delays in permitting by the IEPA, it has to be constructed in the fall, so it basically has to move to next year, but we're working through permits, but it is moving along. We get so much wave action in the harbor, the way the South Pier is right now, that it's actually damaging the floating dock that we just installed. So we would not recommend delaying this project. Foster Field is an F-rated park and also would address some of our athletic field issues. Garden Park and Larimer Park have serious playground issues. There are other parks that... Garden Park is in the very southeast corner of town at Sheridan Road and the lakefront, basically. You know exactly where it is.
Yeah.
It is in very bad condition. And both of these have serious playground issues, although they're not the only ones. They are the worst.
So Laura, interesting. We're not showing up here at all in your $4.4 million, a new Robert Crown Community Center, right? Would we carry that somewhere else?
Because Robert Crown is such a large project and subject to some really specific council actions, I've not included Robert Crown in the facilities or the parks.
But it will be included in the proposed capital budget.
It will be included in the proposed capital budget, but I think that there are some upcoming discussions that will happen that will better guide us as to what the level of improvement is. So moving on to facilities, again, GO bonds. We do have other funds, but I do have to tell you, similar to parks, this is a very one-off. There are some specific projects that can use alternate funds, and parking garages using the parking fund is one of them. But the vast majority of our facilities are really only eligible to be funded by general obligation bonds, and there really are not grants for facility improvements. So again, putting together our basic estimate of what we think you need to do, we would estimate $7.7 million a year versus the typical $3.5 million that gets spent on facilities. And this really doesn't include Robert Crown, which I understand would skew the whole thing even further. So again, our facilities have been really underfunded. I explained how we're doing these in-house assessments, and we did the roof assessments and everything. We were really, to best use our limited funding, we are really trying to focus in on just a few goals, one being safety issues. If there's a known huge safety hazard, we want to fix that. And then we're looking at addressing the building envelope, which basically, fundamentally, is keep the water out of the building. If this were your house, that would be the first thing you would want to do before you do any other capital improvement. It causes a lot of damage. And similarly, we have a lot of roof issues, we have a lot of masonry issues and things, and so we're trying to address those in our 5-year program. And then these aging systems that need replacement before they fail that are critical, and those are largely HVAC systems. So again, it's just exactly like parks. The funding has been inadequate. Our primary funding source is GO bonds, and we really don't have another go-to pot of money for facilities. Here in 2018 are the big deals. I think we're going to have to budget extra money for Fleetwood Jourdain, HVAC electrical, which I have put in here as a proposed. We'll know better when we get the bids back, what we actually need to do. And then Chandler needs a new electrical system, basically, for its main electrical panels. It also needs HVAC, which we would propose doing in 2019. And so kind of the spoiler alert here, because this isn't, 2018 is not really reflective of the problem, is that these projects typically take a long time to do. We have to hire an engineer or an architect to do a design, even once we figure out what's going on. And so we have, in 2018, proposed a lot of small dollar values, like $75,000 here and there, to study a lot of other HVAC problems that we know where the system is about to die. Chandler being one of them, noise being one of them, and these would be projects that would need to be funded in 2019 or 2020. The Ecology Center crawl space and restroom is not an HVAC project, but there are serious issues related to the crawl space and the water service into the building. The Civic Center boiler is about to die. The HVAC is basically done with 100 separate heat pumps that are scattered around the building, most of them very old. And if we deal with the HVAC, we probably need to upgrade the electrical as well. The Civic Center, the fire protection system, the fire panels are really antiquated. Various parts of the system need to be replaced. Animal shelter is not ideal. I haven't put a number on that yet because I'm not really sure what we're going to do, but I think that we need to do a study to figure out what is needed for the animal shelter. So these are kind of like the things coming up, and I know they're not very aesthetically oriented because HVAC is exciting to pretty much nobody, but they are the things that keep the buildings in operation.
Hey, Alderman Fisk has a question or comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. This is really sobering. It's just, wow. So my question is, thinking about the animal shelter, for example, when CARE left, there were funds. I don't remember whether those funds went with them or what happened. The funds did go with them. Okay.
I believe that they gave us about $30,000 of the over $1 million they raised.
Okay. All right. So my question was for some of these things, like the Ecology Center, the animal shelter, does it make sense for us to, in our planning, to put together some fundraising opportunities for folks who have specific interests in these particular facilities? I mean, does that?
So
Makes sense.
This is going to sound terrible, but the revenue generation is really not the business that I'm in for the most part. Yes, I mean, obviously, the animal shelter, the ecology center, there are tenant groups that fundraise, and they would probably be willing to. We haven't necessarily talked to them about all of this either,
And
because
Alderman
it's still
Fisk,
far
members
in
of
the
the
future.
And Alderman Fisk, members of the council, our number one fundraising priority is Robert Crown right now.
Yes, I know that.
And so once that is in hand and done and on its way, absolutely. But I think at this point, we want to focus on Robert Crown, get that done, get that
But
funded.
I would like to tell folks who have a particular interest
Sure.
that there's an opportunity and a need for them to think about making gifts, especially if we're 2 years.
Sure,
2
and
years out,
I
too.
think we'll be ready to start having those discussions probably the first part of 2018. And if I may, Laura, there's one other facility project that probably just below your threshold, and that is the Civic Center elevators.
Yes, that is, it's budgeted at $350,000 in our proposal for next year, because they've been offline many times this year due to repairs, and it's just,
We're looking at a replacement of both elevators.
yes. Both of them, one is much older than the other, but both of them have been offline at different times for repairs
And so
this
that
year
would be a complete gut rehab, if you will.
of the elevators.
Yeah, so we would get new cars and new mechanisms.
Yes. And the last area I'm going to cover in terms of the capital program is water billing, treatment, and storage. You'll see here, there's no general obligation bonds. It's all done through water funds, or we get low-interest loans through the IEPA. So that's refreshing. And we actually have, we are spending a lot of money, particularly right now, but there are a lot of projects coming up that are larger ticket items, but this is basically a situation where the water system, a lot of it is 100 years old or more, and we are putting together, and we have been working towards a really comprehensive capital program that allows us to keep our water system in the condition we need to be able to continue to supply water reliably. But again, the biggest challenge in terms of revenue really is just this inadequate revenue coming in to cover the annual water main replacement. Now, the strategy, which is not mine, has been working on for at least 8 years, has been to generate additional revenue primarily through 3 methods. The first being the pursuit of additional wholesale water customers, and Dave Stoneback has given you many updates on that, but that has been reasonably successful, and we're continuing to do the capital improvements now that will be necessary to connect the customers to our system. And then a big one that's ongoing is this renegotiation of the Skokie contract. The way the rates are structured, they really aren't dependent on the Skokie paying their fair share of the capital costs needed to maintain the system, and that's actually one of the sticking points that they're arguing about and why it has not been solved. So that continues to be worked on by a number of people in the city manager's office. And then we have also, over the years, I believe last year, we proposed this gradual water rate increase that we couple with the sewer rate decrease. That allows us to raise the water rate in a way that's revenue or expense neutral to the residents. And we can do that because we are retiring a lot of sewer debt right now from the long-range sewer program, and that allows us to be able to do this and then better afford our own capital program for the water side. So we just need to sort of stay the course and continue working through all of this stuff. There's a good plan. And these are the projects that we have proposed next year that are over $500,000. This Emerson Street water meter vault is specifically related to the wholesale customers. And then we have our freight elevator issue at the water plant and various things. And you can see we're funded by Water Fund and IEPA loan. The treated water storage project, this is for next year only. It is about a $20 million project all in.
Laura, just for the new members that are up here and myself, what is that, the treated water storage replacement, what is that getting us? I mean, it's a huge investment. What's the benefit?
So we have a 5 million gallon reservoir that holds treated water at the water plant, and we use it, it's actually part of the treatment process in addition to allowing us to just have stored water for reliability issues. A few years ago, it was determined that the roof was failing. The structure was built in 1934 and was estimated to have about an 80-year life. And so we did a life cycle cost analysis to determine would it be more effective to just put a new roof on a structure that is as old as it is, and then, or do we just replace the whole structure? The new roof would have gained us about 20 years maybe in extending the life, and then we would have likely had to replace the structure. So it was determined to be more cost-effective to just replace the structure in the long term. And part of that has to do also with getting a low-interest loan from the IEPA, and then our wholesale customers, like the Northwest Water Commission, participate in paying back that loan, essentially at such a rate that 90% of the cost of the replacement was essentially going to be borne by the wholesale water customers, just the way that the financials worked out. So it seemed very cost-effective for Evanston residents. It was a more reliable way of proceeding. But we have an easement to own and operate the structure on Northwestern University's property under what is currently a parking lot, as long as we have the water plant in the location it's in. But that is really limiting in terms of what can we do as we build the new one. We can essentially put a structure back and exactly the same footprint as the existing structure. There's a lot of impacts to Northwestern University's property because they have buildings that are located very close to the structure that goes 30 feet down. But we've been working closely with them to coordinate that, and Northwestern has been really cooperative, and they are in fact having their contractor install some protective sheeting that we will be able to use during the construction along one side of the reservoir that borders some of their buildings. So it is a huge project undertaking. We've been working on it about 3 years so far. The construction itself will be about 20 months long in construction. A substantial portion of that time, it is likely that we're going to have to take Campus Drive and Lincoln Street at that corner down to one lane and have stoplights. So, I mean, it's a big coordination issue. But again, we've just been working with Northwestern to try to work out all these issues as we go. And we're done. We expect it to be a 100-year structure.
But are we getting any more capacity when this new one's put in? Or again, it's just, we're basically just replacing with new, but capacity is the same, forcefulness of accessing the water is the same, or are there efficiencies in things that will help us generate more revenue because of replacing this?
Substantially, we're getting exactly the same capacity, but there's a flaw in the existing structure that hydraulically, where it's located, because the way water flows downhill, it's there's a share of the water that we really can't use. So although it's rated at 5 million gallons, we're really only able to use about 3.5 million gallons of storage. So with the new structure, we're putting in a pump that will allow us to pump it all the way down, and that will gain us essentially 1.5 million gallons. But to do that, we have to design it so that it's built for that. And the change order that was on tonight's consent agenda is basically related to locating the electrical equipment for that pump.
Thank you.
So I did want to address one other issue, which has to do with staffing. So our staff is working full tilt, even now. I think Wally and others would share with the council that we've really increased the capital program a lot in the last couple of years, with the primarily keeping the same staff, although we do have one additional architect now on staff. But it is possible to increase the capital program more and manage it with the same staff. And we've already kind of been working towards this on the street and transportation side. If we contract out more engineering and architecture so that our staff essentially spends more time project managing and less time designing, then we can do more projects. And then the other way we can deal with it is, right now we do a lot of small projects and just a few large projects. If we bundle projects together and make just a bunch of fewer number of large projects, then we could also continue to increase the number of projects. And there's a limit to it, but I do think that we could handle some more capital with our existing staff, particularly in the parks and facilities side, by doing that bundling effect. So just want to address that. So that is the end of my presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to
Great.
answer
Thank
them.
you very much, Laura. Do Alderman have any questions for Laura? Alderman Rainey?
I don't want to sound too flowery, but I think in all my years here, that's about the best capital plan presentation I've ever heard. That was really tremendous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was excellent.
A lot of people besides me did work on this. I just want
Well, I know, but you told us about it. Thank them for us.
I will.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, from what you've heard in our estimations, we do not believe we have the financial capacity really to do much more in 2018 other than an approximate blueprint of what we've done in 2017. As I think you've heard, and certainly Mr. Lyons can talk further about if you'd like, our ability to issue general obligation debt we feel is limited. I think the council has made it very clear that you're not interested in raising property taxes to increase debt payments. So we likely will need to keep a steady state in 2018. However, I think you can also take away from tonight's presentation that that is not a viable option moving forward much longer, that we have greater needs that will need to be paid for in some manner. So our hope is that we can have continued discussions with you at the beginning of next year to really drill down a little bit further into some of these issues. I think we've done great work over the last few years on our streets, but certainly our parks have suffered greatly, and I think we need to revisit that. We have serious facility issues that we need to come to grips with. Laura just touched the surface of the Civic Center, and for those of you who have either been on the council or been members of this community, you know there's a long, long, long history of discussions about this building, which I think looks better and is utilized more efficiently today than it was when I arrived here 8 years ago, but the innards of the building, as you heard, the steam plant has issues, the electrical systems have issues. We are not going to be able to ignore those for much longer. I think we'll continue to work hard on streets, but at the end of the day, we don't have the money to do all of this. So we would hope that the council, Mr. Mayor, will take time after the operating budget's concluded, and we can focus more on that in 2018. So if there are specific capital needs that you, as members of the council, feel have not been discussed, but you feel are critical issues in your ward, I would urge you to reach out to me, reach out to Mr. Stonebeck, Ms. Biggs, to talk about over the next few weeks. Otherwise, you're going to see a proposed capital budget for next year that looks very similar to the items that were concluded this evening. All right.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Wally, and thank you, Laura. I mean, this was a wonderful presentation and very easy to understand. I wish we had had this conversation at the beginning of the meeting tonight when there were more people here. I think it would have been very helpful for them to hear this and to kind of understand how this impacts decisions that we have to make that maybe are a little bit closer to home for them. But this is the reality that we face. So maybe, Mr. Manager and Mr. Mayor, we can engage more people if we do this a little bit earlier in the evening.
Great, thank you. Any other conversation?
Well,
all right, then thank you very much, Laura.
So lastly, we have a second quarter financial report and a mid-year budget update. Mr. Lyons is here. I think you have kind of combined the two, or you will combine the two as you talk. As we've said in the written documents in tonight's packet, we have some concerns about the current year budget. We would like to, give you a brief overview of where we're at, and then hopefully engage in a little bit of discussion on next steps for the remainder of this year and as we look forward then into 2018. Mr. Lyons?
Thank you, City Manager Bobkowitz, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Clerk Reed. Normally I get to follow some upbeat presentation, and then I have to come in and talk about financials. So Laura really stole my thunder as far as already having a big presentation. So this is this presentation, as the city manager pointed out, is a combination of where we're at with a quarterly report, but as we noted in our memo, we're doing this a month early because we were concerned over where we're at on the revenue side of things. So normally we would wait until the August report to do a second quarter analysis. So with that being said, looking at this, you see that our budget, which right there, 54 million and 54 million, you might think that means we're doing well, but actually we're usually doing much better than that at this time in a given year. So at 45% of budget in both cases, while that's good, it is not where we want to be, and I'll point out why. If you look at the bottom two charts, that purple one on the bottom shows our cash balance dropping off compared to a year ago that our cash balance was accelerating. The green line was in much better shape. And there's a couple of temporary reasons for that aren't something that is a part of a structural issue that I'll get into, but it is something we do need to address long-term when we think about operating and capital. So why did this happen? Well, our cash is $7 million and below $12 million. Biggest reason is 3 payrolls in June, and this happens. When you pay biweekly instead of the 15th and 30th of a month, then you end up with every so many years, 27 pay periods in a year. That's a real killer for a cash basis system. And for our audit, we fixed that. But in this case, our June report has 3 payrolls, and last year it only had 2, so we looked like we were in a lot better shape. It was just a matter of timing. But the other thing that's working here is we do have an issue of our economic development related revenues being below budget. And I'm going to go into what that means when we go through the rest of the report. So when you look at our revenues, I really appreciate a lot of the questions I had regarding the memorandum. 52.5% for our property taxes. That's really great. We are right on target for property taxes because we get paid 55% of the prior year's tax levy for our first installment, and that's what's in so far. We raised our the levy that's included in here. We raised it up by a little over 2% for the pension, because that's included in the general fund now. So a 2% increase overall and 55% of a smaller levy last year. We should be at about 52 to 53%, and we are. So that's about the end of the good news. We do have a lot of stability overall, but this year we have a few concerns. Other taxes are where some of our concern is, and that is due to being under budget at this point during the year, and under budget not due to anything the state's doing, it's due to our economy. Our sales tax is going to be under, and our income tax is going to be under, and due to the favorable weather, our utility taxes are under, but we saved more in expenses than we lost in revenue, so that's not a bad thing. But the biggest item up there is you look at our permit revenue at 20%, 11.6 million budgeted and 2.4 million in. You'll hear me saying a lot tonight about permit revenue and then building permit revenue. Building permit revenue is just a subset of all of our permit revenue. So we have permits for HVAC, for electrical, for plumbing. They all fall into the permit pot, but building permits are the ones you usually hear, and that's strictly just the building permit review itself, not all of our ancillary. Either way, we're way under budget year to date, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Johanna Leonard will also, I think if we have the time, we'll talk briefly about what's going on, because we do have a good handle on what's going on. We just don't like it. So overall, 45%. I think what's important to note is that footnote that says we were at 57 million last year in a smaller budget. So our revenues are 3 million below where they were last year in a slightly smaller budget. We jump to so why is this? Again, we are looking at state funds included today in this presentation. We didn't know what the state was doing, so we kept this presentation close to what the memo says. We didn't want to have too many mixed messages in there. We will talk a little bit about the state's budget. However, the big thing is that we will see a reduction in local government distributive funds in the 17-18 state year, but we did not get a property tax freeze. So that is good news from a perspective of our flexibility with our revenues going forward certainly helps us with pension issues and debt service issues. So the local revenues, though, our general tax revenues, income and sales, they are lower than projected to the tune of anywhere from $400,000 for just economically driven issues for income tax, and closer to $700,000 to $800,000 for sales tax. So over $1 million under budget in those two areas. The Illinois Municipal League did not project this, and we do use them. The Department of Revenue did not project this. This all started occurring in March, April of this year as we got glimpses of where we were looking at for how the economy was progressing. So, and then as I noted before, permit and revenue timing will be discussed a little bit later, but it really comes down to our baseline permits are actually doing very well. The permits for what I would say for home improvements, smaller projects, those are coming in close to budget. It is the timing of some major projects that are not all Northwestern. We also have our own downtown major projects that we will not see in this year, but there's still the chance we will see them. But ending the year well is very important to a lot of those capital things we just talked about.
Marty, I just want to restate something that you said, because I want to make sure everybody up here, and myself included, understand it. You said that Illinois Municipal League didn't project this. Another way to state this is the decrease that we're seeing in our sales tax and in our economy here is not unique to Evanston, that other communities are experiencing the same thing. Is that true?
Yes. What we can't say is whether or not they budgeted conservatively. We were a little aggressive. We've been going very well in the downtown. So I think we tried to hit our number right on the head on income and sales tax. A different community might have been conservative in their budget. And at the end of the year when they say, oh, look, we have found money because they under budgeted their sales tax, that's great, but they may have raised a revenue or raised a tax when they didn't need to. So in any event, I think we'll be mindful of this when we do our 2018 budget projections for sales and income tax. So the other thing that continues to be an issue is parking ticket revenues. Those continue to be down, but that's also offset by all of our parking fee revenues for meters being way up. It's not quite a one-to-one relationship, but it is close. And so that means we have a lot of folks using parking meters and paying for their meter time and not paying tickets. And that's a great thing. We always have said we are not in the ticket business to raise revenue. We're in that business to have compliance. So that is still working, but we reduced this budget last year and we're still under that reduced amount. So it is something to discuss this fall. So on the expense side, what we're looking at, I'll just call your attention straight to the bottom. Last year, again, because of that payroll issue, we were at $49 million, and we're at $54 million this year. So you see, revenues down $3 million at the 6-month mark, expenses up $5 million. So that's a lot of that's timing, but it will follow through towards the end. We do not want to project that we're going to be $10 million under at the end of the year. That's not what we're saying. But these are issues we're facing right now. And when I show you a report that says, gee, we're $5 million lower in cash, I want to be able to explain why. So why is that? Well, police and fire are right at budget, and there's reasons to think on the police side that we will be a little bit over budget at year end, and possibly fire as well. Police mainly because the police and fire, we have the two major unions in there where you don't have any of those pay increases in the budget yet. We haven't settled the contracts, so we have budgeted a 1.5% increase, but none of that's in the actual. So that will be a major increase that will hit in the second half. And then Parks and Recreation and Community Services, while they're at 41.65, last year at this time they were at 34%. So they're running a little bit more than usual. Doesn't look like they're over budget, but the bulk of their expenses also happen in the summertime, and they're not all showing up yet in this process. So on a slightly better note, the Public Works Agency, that 42% is actually a fairly solid number because we have went through their numbers. They have some vacancies. They're under because of the warm weather and the lack of snow expenses. So that's a fairly, we're pretty confident in that number. So what does it mean? Like as I just noted, those departments are running a little bit over. We'll review these in more detail. Tonight we're talking about revenues. In 2 weeks we'll talk a little bit more about expenses. But you can see by the hour, if we'd have had the whole thing in tonight, it just wouldn't have worked. So we decided to break up the discussion tonight in that manner. We've talked about the other departments running well, the 3 payrolls in June, and expenses not being evenly distributed, and the general wage increase is not in our actuals yet. As we hope for a new alderman, we would not do the non-bargaining increase until the bargaining unit contracts are settled. So from January 1, the start of our fiscal year, to now, there hasn't been a general wage increase given, but there would still be the contract practice of retroing that back. And then we also treat non-bargaining the same way, or we end up with more bargaining personnel. So that's the end of the general fund. We always like to make sure we keep you updated on the enterprise funds. They are all doing very well. There's no surprises. New council members had a lot of questions about why are we running a solid waste fund in the red. And we started off much further in the red due to decisions in 2012 that we didn't want to raise the refuse fees that high, that quick to make the solid waste fund self-sustaining. So we started it off in a negative position, and it has eaten away anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000 of its deficit each year. And we consider whether to make a change on that each year. And it's been steady as it goes to just say, well, let's keep an eye on it. The rates are set so that it's eating into the deficit. We have bigger issues of concern, as the capital discussion pointed out tonight. Water, sewer, and parking, they'll always be substantially further under budget on the expense side, depending on the amount of capital projects being done. And in the case of water and sewer, we usually haven't billed all of our summer months at this point. So those will be our biggest billing timeframes. So it's very, it's definitely the case in the sewer fund. 49%, that's great, because it doesn't have much in the way of bonds. It will have higher revenues in the third quarter. And in the case of the water fund, it did have borrowing in there, and that's not reflected yet. We haven't done any borrowing, and that's why the sewer fund is at 37% of the revenues. So, again, the issue is that we are, for all funds on our revenues, they do vary quite a bit, but general fund, we've talked about it. Looking at the pension funds, you might say, why is it only at 33%? The only thing reflected there is the property taxes. We do our investments at year end. They're all in the stock market. They're all on accrual basis. So you won't see our actual investment income showing up until we convert all of those assets, all those investments, and we actually will show the investments being closer to 50% or coming through on a monthly basis like they should. So the revenues, there is definitely no surprise there, because at that point in time, or at this point in time, we would have close to $20 million in bond proceeds for the whole year being done between water, sewer, parking, and our general obligation bonds. So if you added $10 million into this, we're at closer to 50% across all funds for our revenues. Same thing in the way of expenses. And when you throw in capital expenses lagging behind, that's why once we threw in the our expenses for capital, we would get closer to 50%. There's no surprises as far as where we're at. You see that the capital only has $3,500,000 invoiced. We still have as Ms. Biggs pointed out, $29 million of projects already approved by you. So it's just a matter of timing. Those will all come through in the next 6 to 8 months as expenses. Police and fire pension, again, no major issues there. That's right on target. The TIF funds, we have more expenses this year than normal, and that's because of the Main Street, the Fountain Square project. So where are we going to land? So that's the end of the 6-month review, but where are we? What are our concerns? And our concerns, as we noted, building permits were only at 20%, and we were, the 9.2 million is our total for building permits, and we're projecting that we could be anywhere from $2 to $2.7 million below budget. And that is mainly due to several, not even several, about 3 to 4 major projects that may not come in on time, but we have a high confidence that they will come in next year. So that's good news. But as we know, we have to hit our fund balance number or when we do our bond. So that's why we're talking about this issue. We do not want to be in a situation we were 3 years ago where we did not project this correctly. I mentioned income tax and sales tax shortfalls. That is different than income tax, sales tax cuts from the state. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next week, but those are shortfalls from our projections. And then, as we noted, the current union contracts that are potentially out there are 2.75% for 2017, and we budgeted 1.5%. So we have to come up with those dollars. And then on a more positive note, there's a potential for just under $2.5 million in expense cuts from departments to year end. So we have some cuts that are just happening like the warm winter, but then we've also asked departments to go ahead and provide us with what they would do if they had to reduce their budget by 2.5%. And the due date for that was just today. So we're not talking about that tonight. We will be talking about it in the near future at the next meeting and on through the whole budget process. So what does scenario one, I'm going to jump to the next slide because it's a lot easier to see this. Scenario one produces a $3 million deficit. That's the critical number. And you can see the top is revenues coming in under budget, and then expenses coming in slightly under budget, but not as far. And then I'll jump back to scenario two. If building permit revenue is delayed even further, or some of the projects don't come through, we could see it being 4.7 million, or only being at about 50% of budget. We don't think that's the high probability. We think scenario one is a much higher probability. Same with income tax and sales tax shortfalls. We're much more comfortable. The idea of scenario two is to identify a worst case scenario. So in this scenario, I do want to point out that in both scenarios, we're talking about when would we do a general wage increase. So please note that general wage increase going all the way back to January costs more than one that only goes back to July, but most union contracts would retro back to the first of the year or the end of the last contract. So I'm going to jump back to scenario two and then point out the difference. That's a $5.5 million deficit if things are not quite worst case, but still fairly bad off overall. You have less in the permit reductions, all of our revenues. That's the big issue. The expenses, we're fairly confident of our control on the expense side. It's those revenues that are our issues. So given that, what could we do? If revenues are down, there are some revenues that take time to put in place. We cannot raise a property tax mid-year, but you can change a parking ticket revenue, which is a general fund revenue. We can do our own local motor fuel tax, and we can do liquor tax, and we will provide in the future. Many communities have gone down the path of increasing their home rule sales tax in preparation of the state trying to take 10% of it when they were doing their budget presentations. What does that mean to us? Well, it's just under $1 million if we did it immediately, but it's $2.9 million for an entire year. So fairly large numbers, but given our situation, $3 million deficit, $5 million deficit, that's the kind of numbers that we do need to look at for a balance. Expense considerations that we talked about, trying to negotiate only doing the retroactivity by July 1, departments giving their own preliminary ideas on how to cut expenses this year. It's important to stress this is all a this year discussion, not next year's budget. How do we finish this year? So I think I have hit all of those.
Marty, Alderman Rainey has a comment or question.
Well, I'm not voting for any of your tax increases, just so you know. However, is 831 Emerson having any issues getting that project off the ground? Or if you don't know, do you know if there's, any?
I'll let Johanna answer as soon as she'll have a
I'm just
detail.
wondering, are there permit fees included in your permit projection for this year?
No, theirs are not in either scenario.
Are any permit fees included in your projections that we do not have in the bank?
Gary Gertis, our chief building official, is also here. Who can also help.
And if you need to jump to that,
you got to give us some. I don't have any paper on this stuff. Whose permit fees are they? No. It's hard to think about what you're talking about. We don't have the paper.
Okay, so we did this morning to anticipate this question. Good evening, Johanna Leonard, Community Development Director. So since this is small font, I'm just going to read through and try to explain what's going on. So in the middle column where there's some zeros, that's where we're at today with permit revenue.
Okay, wait. I can't even see zeros up there. So if you could just
This is a vision test for everybody. So if you go, I'll just read I can give a verbal on this. Welsh Ryan's project, we have not received a permit on, nor have we permit fees for, nor the Tech AB wing infill on Northwestern's campus. And that's because they were still going through the MWRD permitting process. And that's, my understanding is that is just about complete, and we anticipate in the coming month and a half that we would receive those revenues. Next up is the Jacobs Center on Sheridan Road, which is the former Kellogg Center space. We haven't received those revenues, but we anticipate receiving a portion of that project, which was budgeted at $1.5 million. We anticipate receiving about half of that before the end of the year. Continuing to go down, we estimate about $1 million for the year for various Northwestern projects. They do different small projects throughout the campus. That comes to a total of $1 million. To date, we've received a little bit over $500,000 on those projects. And then to answer your question about planned developments, 1815 Ridge was budgeted at a little over $500,000. That has not come in, and we don't anticipate it starting this year. And the same thing for 831 Emerson, that they have to do demolition, some environmental work. Staff spoke to their project manager today, and they're anticipating coming in early 2018 for their project. So we have indicated we will work with them to move this forward as quickly as possible, but it sounds like a beginning of 2018. And then I did skip over 824 Noise, which is they are providing on-site units for the inclusionary housing ordinance. So within the ordinance, they are allowed to defer their payment of fees until they've received their temporary certificate of occupancy. So we won't receive those until they're complete, until they receive that, and we think that will be likely in the beginning of 2018. And then the last line is the baseline revenue expected, which we budgeted to be about $3 million, and to date, we've received about 1.15, and we anticipate that, but at the end of the year, we'll have about 2.5. So that brings our total to, currently right now we're at 1.679, and we anticipate by the end of the year at 6.636.
So right from Marty.
You say that last number again?
So the 6.6, almost 60% of that will come from the Northwestern projects that we will receive in permit fees.
But a minute ago, you said 1.6 so far, but we've really gotten 2.4, I thought Marty's report showed, in building permit fees, right? Already.
All permit fees
that's
versus
all,
this is just
oh,
building
that's
permit
all
fees.
permit fees, but we've only gotten 1.6 million in permit fees, and we had budgeted 9.2, building permits, thank you, Molly, but we had budgeted 9.2 million in building permit fees. Okay, all right. So I just want to make sure I'm clear, so you ran two scenarios. Both of those scenarios, if you could put up maybe scenario 1 or 2, Marty. Either one is fine. But both of those scenarios already projected departments within Evanston finding reductions in expenditures, and I think that, if I remember right, that was about 2-point-something million.
And that was based on actuals, and not. I mean, that was based on a review with the departments. Where did they think they would be at the end of the year without going through a purposeful reduction? Now, when they do the reports they're giving to us now, some of it will be duplicated. It wasn't. We didn't request 2.5% on top of, for instance, Dave Stonebeck and Public Works Agency is going to be 6 or 7% under budget. We hope. We didn't say now get another 2.5%.
Can we go back to? Can we see the slide up there that had the table? Not that table. Yeah. There we go. There we go.
Now that's here's
right. So this is the scenario 1, right? So department estimates 2.4 million. I guess the point that I'm trying to show between your scenario 1 and your scenario 2, it's even with the department estimates of soft reductions that they can make, we're still right now showing a deficit between scenario 1 and 2 of $3 million and $5.5 million, even with those reductions. So in order to close that gap, we need to either find additional reductions or you look at the revenue side.
And because the third leg of the stool would be, can we use fund balance? And we really can't. We're below our minimum, and it would send the wrong signal. Our cost for borrowing would go up. And just in a general sense, we want that 2 months' worth of reserves so that we can operate in routine times. If we were up at 16, 17%, we could say to the council could say, can we take 1 million from reserves? Yes, we could, but we're only at 13, 14%. So that isn't out there for us.
Can you go to scenario 2? Then I just have one final question. So it sounded like earlier you were saying that the state of Illinois in the new budget that just passed is reducing the local government distributive fund. Is that correct? I know there were stuff, and I saw emails going back and forth giving you extra payments, but at the end of the day, is the amount of money that we get back for income tax, which is a local government distributive fund, is that equal to what it was before June 30th, or will it be reduced? And if it's going to be reduced, how much is that going to be reduced, and is that reflected in your scenario?
Second question first, it's not reflected in scenario 1, which I think is the scenario we'll want to go forward with, especially after we've done a much more in-depth look at the permit revenue. I don't think it helps us to say we're going to lose 4.7 when we think there's a real chance that it'll only be 2.7. But to your point, the way the statute and the way it's been sold is that, don't worry, municipalities, you will get 14 payments in a 17-18 year, meaning July 1st, 17 through June 30th, 18. That's the state's year. And that doesn't help us in 2017 because we're going to, and it's also payments. We already properly track our actual income tax by the amount we should receive. So when the state decides to give it to us is not material to our financial reports. We recognize the revenue when it's earned by the city of Evanston. So when the state decides to give it to us does not matter. It matters to our cash balance, but not to what the bond folks will look at. They'll look at our fund balance and say, okay, you hit your revenue or you didn't, not what was your cash. So in this case, while they'll give us 14 payment months for our calendar year in 2017, we're going to get 12 months, 6 months at the budgeted amount and 6 months 10% less than what we thought. That's the legislation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Alderman Rainey?
The answer to the question that he asked is we are not going to get less. We're actually going to get a little more than we had planned.
No.
The answer that he just gave me to that question was that we are going to get 10% less.
No,
is what he just said, though.
But that's not, that is, I mean, every single report that we've received is there are 14 payments, they're going to take 10%, but we're actually going to get 13 payments, which equates to a little bit more than the 12 payments we got previously. I mean, everything that we've read.
And
I
that is
read
not
the Illinois municipal statement that we got today.
Yeah.
And those are all, and I read the same statement, those are all cash basis reports on a generally accepted accounting principle report. That is our audit. We will get 12 months of payments in that audit, not 14.
No, we'll get 13 payments.
No, we will get 12. I respectfully disagree
Okay,
that it will only be.
You're the professional, but I'm telling you,
And I will be happy to be wrong if that's the case, but we definitely, we record all of our payments from the state. At year end, when they're 2 months behind, we record those 2 months into the right year. Even though we haven't gotten them yet, they're a receivable, and that's where, so this year we won't call them a receivable. We will have received them, but we would still book them as revenue in the right year.
So let's do this, because I think it's like the Cook County minimum wage ordinance, lots of questions, uncertainty, particularly with the sick time, and people want to understand. You know, if you guys don't mind just talking certainly to the Illinois Municipal League again, talking to your peers, and just making sure that we understand and have it right, because it seems a little convoluted.
This was all done on the 4th of July.
Exactly. There's a lot going on real quick. Alderman Fleming.
Marty, if you could just help me and maybe some people who are maybe still awake at home understand this. So we assumed we budgeted for 9.2 for our permit revenue. And right now we think we maybe are going to end around 6.6.
Yep.
Right, okay. And so what was that 9.2 based on? I understand these Northwestern projects are down the pike, and assuming that we, thought 831 was going to go through earlier, maybe some other things, but just do we have, what was the $3 million based on? Were there some really big projects that just didn't come through, or were we just hopeful that people were coming? I'm trying to understand how we got here.
No, I think the table, and we apologize for the being hard to see on the screen, but I think this table is a clear explanation. In that second column is the estimated permit revenue, which takes the 9.2, what we received to date, and then what we're projecting. So I think that's the tail of the tape, so to speak.
The baseline is when people get permits to do their kitchen or other home rehab projects. That's the baseline. Those are the smaller projects that are incrementally large enough to estimate $3 million. So that's based on previous years' performance and looking at tracking over the previous years.
And again, I do want a cautionary bit of optimism. We're not saying that the projects won't ever happen. We're talking about timing and how we close the year. So when you look at the sheet that we handed out, there is a 1815 Ridge. If that goes through, it will be $556,000 in 2018 that we budgeted in 2017. That's still a revenue that we can count on in the next year. It does come down to whether you feel the large projects like this are ongoing base numbers or one time that we might use differently for operating versus other one-time expenses. And that's something, I don't want to get into that at this late hour. That's something we'll be talking about during the budget cycle.
Thank you, Marty. Alderman Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Marty, I'm trying to stay awake here, but, struggling, actually. But I want to touch on that baseline revenue, and I've had some conversations with the permitting department, and it seems like there's a long delay getting these permits through. And I know this is a small number, but I've had a couple of conversations with Johanna. Is there anything that we can do from a staff perspective to deal with the backlog?
Not in these major projects, those are all.
Get the major projects. I mean,
Well,
those are
but
big
if you-
swings, I get that. I'm talking about the everyday, you just said it, the kitchen.
But we're at $2.5 million out of a $3 million, so I don't think we have a major backlog on those. So that's through that timeframe. I think that's more an issue of where we think they'll come in, not because those are being delayed.
And perhaps, Alderman Braithwaite, Mr. Mayor, Gary Gertis, our chief building official, has been kind enough to stay the evening. So I think the least we could do is have him ask a pertinent question, answer a pertinent question. So Gary, what can you tell us, absent the large projects, these smaller projects and the timing and the resources?
And I think the main, when you talk about delay, plan review is probably that's the major piece of that. We have the same staff that we've had. Actually, we've had a reduction in staff over the years. Our permit activity continues to grow. And even like this year, when you're seeing revenues down, we still have the same amount of permits that we did last year. They're smaller. So I think that we do use, we've been using Safe Build, a third party, a little more extensively this year to try to offset that. But it's just a matter of number of projects versus number of staff. So, we do the best we can.
4 weeks to get through a regular permit.
And
I'm
it
just
can,
thinking
that's
a couple
that's true.
of few staff members, and maybe that expedites things. But
And one of the challenges, Alderman Braithwaite, members of the council, we have is finding them. That it is nearly impossible to find full-time staff to do this work. Safe Build, which I think many of you know, but maybe members of the public don't know, is a third party that provides contract staff members. I think we're using them to really the greatest extent possible. They are also having difficulty with staff. So finding the qualified people to do this work has been a challenge for us and really all of our neighboring communities that we stole Gary from someone, and we stole Anna, who's our main plan check person, from someone. So it is a challenge for us, but certainly we're willing to continue to talk with Safe Built, and they are really the main provider of contract staffing in this area. And if we can get additional resources, we will.
Any further questions for Marty?
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, our plan then is to come back to you on the 24th. We are going to propose a scenario that will be, to the best of our abilities, a balanced budget for the balance of 2017. Marty, maybe if you could show the revenue enhancement slide again. Budget staff has done an excellent job looking at some of the options there. My sense of the city council is that the sales tax, the liquor tax, and the gas tax increases are probably not tenable at this juncture. Is that a fair assessment? The boot regulation change, we would like to come back to you and talk more about on the 24th. We have procured a different device that we believe will help us with the issue of booting vehicles. It is a device that covers the windshield, not the car, not the wheel. It is called the Barnacle. And it's a real thing. We need to change a couple of, yes, it's exactly where we found it. It was on an episode of Modern Family. I asked staff to find out if it was real, and sure enough, it is. And so we are procuring a couple of barnacles. We need to make some changes in order to use them, and so we're going to talk more about that on July 24th. We'd also Barnacle. Other communities around the country have also started using it and have reported success. So it is a little non-standard, but we believe could be helpful to us in collecting additional dollars. And then finally, the parking ticket increase, we would like to come forward to the council for your consideration on the 24th and adjustments of the parking ticket. So those would be the two of those, 5 major revenue increases that the budget staff has dutifully developed. We would like to come forward with the appropriate ordinances to have you consider those on the 24th. So that, combined with the budget reductions we're asking for the departments, I think there are opportunities to look for transfers from non-general fund accounts, which we will also propose to you. And while we don't believe this will be painless, we believe that we can come up with a solution for the balance of 2017. We will come back with a plan then for the 24th, and then certainly this informs our discussions regarding 2018. And we do have in your packet, and I'd like to bring to your attention, Mr. Mayor, if I may, a calendar of additional meetings to move forward with the schedule. Just a second. If you look on page 32 of the packet, we are proposing a variety of dates for the budget process, but we're also proposing some specific dates for council meetings to talk about plans. If you recall your meeting a few weeks back with Gene Bonander, the council directed us to look at some dates for discussing plans. So we're proposing September 18th as a meeting for the discussion of affordable housing and economic development issues. We would then on the 30th of October talk about the downtown West Evanston, West End, and Lakefront master plans. And then on the 20th of November, the strategic plan, the livability plan, and the Central Street master plan. Also included on the schedule is the annual Saturday morning meeting for the annual public hearing on the budget, and we're proposing that for Saturday, October 28th. So before we leave this item, Mr. Mayor, we would ask that the council concur with the general direction that we're outlining and also approve this budget calendar and planning meetings for the balance of 2017.
All in favor?
Yes.
Everybody in favor of that?
Yep.
Okay. There you go, City
Have
Manager.
some additional.
Oh, excuse me, Alderman Rainey.
Yes, I would like staff to prepare an explanation of the local government distributive fund as it stands based on the recent action by the Illinois General Assembly.
Certainly. We'll have that
As
for the
soon
24th.
as possible, with what we thought was going to happen and what has actually happened and how it affects our local receipts.
Terrific. Alderman Wilson.
And I just want to clarify, so when we come back on the 24th, the 3 tax options are not going to be in the proposal. Is that my understanding?
That is my recommendation. So I saw nodding head, so we will not include that. We will only come back with an ordinance for your consideration to change the fine for parking tickets and the changes to the law that will require to use this alternate booting device.
Okay, and I just wanted to make that crystal clear so we don't get 4,000 emails about something that we're not actually doing. So.
Again, I asked the budget staff to come up with what they thought were reasonable solutions.
Understood.
Which I thought was important to share with you, but it is not my recommendation to do those first 3, or those 3 that were.
I wanted it crystal clear for those who are typing it up out there.
I see the crystal clear looks on the Evanston Press
Thank you.
Corps' faces, so they.
That'll be the headline. No tax increases here in Evanston. All right.
So, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Appreciate it. I apologize
you.
for the long hour, but that concludes special orders of business.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you all, and thank you, city staff, for everyone's efforts to take us through a very long sort of special orders of business. We're now going to move on to the consent agenda and items here. So, Alderman Braithwaite, if you'll take us through the administration and public works. And if you don't mind, add the consent agenda, the approval of the minutes there, and then A1 let's see, in terms of conflicts of interest, just so I know Alderman Suffredin, we still have the Amazon issue. Alderman Ruth Simmons, do you have an issue with? Not today. Okay, so we'll do a vote as we've done before.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to move item M1, the approval of the minutes for the regular city council meeting June 19th, 2017. I'd also like to move item A. Do we want to take that first, or which one are we taking?
Yeah, let's take A1, and then we'll do a vote on both of those, and then we'll do the bills separately.
And also move item A1, payroll June 12th, 2017 through June 25th, 2017, in a dollar amount of $3,013,726.81. Both items are for action.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Clerk, could you take the roll?
Alderman Wilson. Alderman Rue Simmons.
Aye.
Alderman Ravel. Alderman Rainey.
Aye.
Alderman Fleming.
Aye.
I skipped Tom, but we're not on. That's it. So Alderman Sufferton.
Aye.
Alderman Fisk. Alderman Braithwaite.
Aye.
And then Alderman Nguyen.
All right, M1 and A1 pass 9-0.
I'd also,
Alderman Braithwaite?
sure. I'd like to now move item A2 for action. It's the bills list July 11th, 2017, in the dollar amount of $4,296,958.87. That's for action.
Is there a second? Okay, Clerk, could you take the roll?
Alderman Wilson. Alderman Rue Simmons.
Aye.
Alderman Ravel. Alderman Rainey.
Aye.
Alderman Fleming.
Aye.
Alderman Fisk. Alderman Braithwaite.
Aye.
And Alderman Nguyen.
All right. A2 passes 8-0 with Sufferton recusing. Okay, Alderman Braithwaite, let's go through the rest of the AP&W.
Sure. Item A, 3.1, contracts with the Water Resources, Inc. for water meter replacement program. That's Phase 1, and water meter accessories in the dollar amount of $1,153,515. I'd also like to move item A, 3.2, change order number 2.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
We are having a technical difficulty with the recording for the meeting. We would ask that we could maybe take a brief break to try to reestablish the recording. We hit a point at 5 hours, and so we're now there.
Means we have to adjourn.
So how much of a break do
If we
need?
could take 5 minutes.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. When we return, we will start with A32 with Alderman Braithwaite. Okay, we're going to go ahead and resume the July 10th City Council meeting after our short break. We've got video footage back up of all of us looking our best at 11 p.m. at night. So we will turn it back to you, Alderman Braithwaite. We're at A32 as we go through the consent agenda.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move item 3.2, change order number 2 for the agreement for treated water storage replacement engineering services to CDM in the dollar amount of $58,932.00. I'd also like to move item A3.3, that's a contract with Garland DBS Inc. for roof repairs and window replacement at city facilities. That's in the dollar amount of $124,879. I'd also like to move item A, 3.4, contract with Nature's Perspective Landscape Inc. for Evanston Plaza corner plantings and landscape maintenance in the dollar amount of $23,720.27. I'd also like to move item A, 3.5, sidewalk cafe for Sam's Chicken and Ribs. That's for action. A, 3.6, single source agreement with World Systems Inc. for digital Word Systems Inc. for digital. You're lucky I'm doing that. Jesus.
It's only 11 o'clock at night. Keep going. You're doing well.
Thank you. That's in the dollar amount of $23,689. Also, item A3.7, contract with BMO Harris for the purchasing cars for city employees. And that's going to be approximately, what is that, $20,600 annually. Item A, 3.8, other post-employment benefits report that was accepted for and placed on file. Item A4, Resolution 58-R-17, authorizing the city manager to execute a real estate contract for the purchase of a vacant lot on 2005 Gray Avenue, and that's in the dollar amount for $42,500. And that's going to be a site for the next ETHS Geometry and Construction House. Item A5, Ordinance 58-0-17, amending the City Code 7-2-5-3, permit fees to include block party regulations. I think we made some changes to that as well. Item A6, Ordinance 59-0-17, decreasing the number of Class H liquor license for Evanston Pan LLC, doing business as PETA 1. That's going to be for suspension of the rules. Also, and action. Thank you. Also, item A7, Ordinance 60-0-17, decreasing the number of Class D liquor licenses for the Noodle Shop Co. Colorado, Inc., doing business as Noodle & Co. That is also for introduction and action. Item A8, Ordinance 60, and suspensions of the rules. Would you like for me to read that again? No. All right. Item A8, Ordinance 61-0-17, increasing the number of Class D liquor licenses for Furious Spoon, Evanston Maple Avenue, LLC, doing business as, Furious Spoon. That's going to be for introduction. Item A9, Ordinance 62-0-17, increasing the number of Class K liquor licenses for the Beer on Central, LLC, doing business as Beer on Central. That's also for introduction. And then item AN, Ordinance 63-0-17, decreasing the number of Class P4 liquor licenses for the North Shore Cider Company, LLC, doing business as North Shore Cider. And at the request of Alderman Rainey, she's asking for us to suspend the rules, and that's going to be for introduction and action. Item A11, 64-0-17, increasing the number of Class P3 liquor licenses for the North Shore Cider Company, doing business as North Shore Cider. Again, Alderman Rainey is requesting the suspension of the rules, and we're going to have that for introduction and action. Item 12, A12, Ordinance 14-0-17, amending the City Code Title 11 Administrative Adjudication. Staff is recommending that the adoption of amending the Title 11 Administrative Adjudication, City of Evanston Code of 2012, to reflect the city's organization, realignment, and consolidation of the city's Administrative Adjudication Division. That's going to be for action. I'd also like to move item A13, Ordinance 22-0-17, amending the City Code Section 3-4-C2, Liquor Control Regulations, Powers and Duties. That's going to be for action. Also, the last item is A14, Ordinance 40.
Please take that off.
Okay. That's going to be removed at Alderman Rynn's request and addressed later. That's my report.
Thank you, Alderman Braithwaite. Alderman Rainey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'm going to read the special orders of business. Those have to be moved. The first item was the Capital Improvement Program Planning, SP1. I'm going to move that for action. Second is the second quarter financial report for fiscal year 2017. Staff is asking us to accept and place on file. The mid-year 2017 budget report, staff is asking us to accept and place on file. The water service shutoff for non-payment process, we're being asked to accept and place that on file. We have the request for proposal to lease the Harley Clark Mansion at 2603 Sheridan Road. We made several amendments, which the city manager read, which we agreed to. That's going to be redone and sent back to us for approval. So that's not for action. It's probably being held at the council level. SP6 is the Cook County minimum wage and sick leave ordinance next steps, which we're going to discuss at a later date on September 17. So I move those items.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey.
Yes. And then Planning and Development Committee met this evening, and we're asking for, according to Alderman Wilson's request, introduction and action of Ordinance 65-017, granting a special use for a Type 2 restaurant, Pono Ono Poke, at 1630 Chicago Avenue. Ordinance 56017 is for action tonight, and that grants a special use for a public utility and major zoning relief for a fence or wall at 2506 Green Bay Road. It's a public utility for the replacement of existing ComEd equipment. That is for action.
All right, thank you, Alderman Rainey. Alderman Fisk for the Human Services Committee.
Yes, thank you. H1 is Ordinance 49017, amending the City Code Title 7 by adding Chapter 18, Pavement Sealant Applicators. The Evanston Environment Board recommends the City Council adoption of this ordinance banning the use of coal tar pavement sealers in the City of Evanston. It's for action.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Nguyen, Economic Development Committee.
Yes, thank you. I have item 01, updated guidelines for entrepreneurship support program. The Staff and Economic Development Committee recommend adoption of the updated program guidelines for the entrepreneurship support program that limit funding eligibility to applicants who have completed an entrepreneurship training curriculum and provide more detail about the information applicants must provide as part of their required business plan submissions. That's for action tonight. We have item 02.
Could you take 02 off, please?
Okay. Item 02 is off at the request of Alderman Fisk. That's the Storefront Modernization Program. Item 03 is applications for the Evanston Great Merchant Grant Program. Staff and Economic Development Committee recommend the City Council approve financial assistance to the Great Merchant Grant Program totaling $14,766.20 to 3 Evanston Business District areas: Central Street Business Association, Howard Street Business, and West Village Business Association. That's for action tonight. Finally, item 04 is 128 to 130 Chicago Avenue Development Update. Staff recommends this item be continued until July 24th, 2017 council meeting due to the need for further research on specific issues related to the agreement and to TIF considerations regarding the development.
A point of clarification, please. So the action is to defer it until the 24th. Is that correct? I just want to be clear on that. So it's not action.
So this is
approved.
not for action tonight. This is
Not
being
for approval.
Not for, well, it's not,
Okay.
right, not for approval. The action is to hold it till July 24th.
Thank you.
That's correct. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson, Housing and Community Development Act
Oh,
Committee.
that's me.
Excuse me. All right, Alderman Rainey.
Yes, Housing and Community Development. Resolution 62R17, the 2017 Action Plan, and adopting the 2017 Community Development Block Grant, Home Investment Partnership, and Emergency Solution Grant Program budgets for 2017. These are for action. Then we have the Resolution 63R17, amending the 2015 Community Development Block Grant Program and authorizing the reallocation of unexpended CDBG funds for the 2017 action plan. That is for action tonight. And I just wanted to mention, which I should have done before, that 45 days from now, after we submit the 62R17 to the feds, we will be notified and we will be able to have executed funds will be released, so that we can then tell all of the grantees that they have their money and they can begin their spending them. So, move approval.
Alderman Rainey, would you mind, could you put the appointments forward as well?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't turn the page.
No, I don't know if that was necessarily.
Also, the appointments, Mr. Mayor has reappointed to the Ethics Board Jennifer Billingsley, and to the Housing, Homelessness, and Human Relations Commission, Noel Gilbreth and Monica Long. That's for action.
Terrific.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Is there a second? City Clerk, could you take the roll?
Alderman Wilson? Aye. Alderman Ruth Simmons?
Aye.
Alderman Sufferton? Aye. Alderman Revelle? Aye. Alderman Rainey?
Aye.
Alderman Fleming?
Aye.
Alderman Fisk? Aye. Alderman Braithwaite?
Aye.
Alderman Nguyen? Did I start with you?
Aye.
You did. Okay. The consent agenda passes 9-0. In terms of the committees, Standing Committee, Alderman Braithwaite.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move item A14, ordinance 46-0-17, amending the city code 9-5-15, regulating small unmanned aircraft in the city of Evanston.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, I've had a lot of discussions with people over the last several weeks, and I've been doing a lot of research about drone ordinances. I'd like to offer an amendment tonight to this that changes it somewhat, and then I would also like to hold it to the date certain of July 24th, so we get an opportunity for the public to comment on the amendatory language that I'm offering tonight. So if you look at your ordinance under section 9-5-15-2, which is operating regulations, I am proposing, the essence of my amendment is to continue to have a drone ordinance with certain regulations, but to permit drone usage in city parks, in schools, near schools and schoolyards when school is not in session. And otherwise, the ordinance would stay the same. So the language I would change would be subsection A of 9-5-15-2, operating regulations, and I would change it to say that drones are prohibited from being operated over any City of Evanston building, open air assembly unit, school when in session, schoolyard when school is in session, hospital or place of worship, without, and then also without the property owner's consent. So that's the language that I would like to change, and then hold this to a date certain of July 24th.
I'd second your motion to hold.
Thank you.
Alderman Fleming.
So I have another suggestion if we're amending this, and it would be regarding the fine. So I don't know if this is the time to discuss this or when it comes back on the 24th, but I just thought the $500 fine was very high for this ordinance.
We can discuss that, too.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, Alderman Nguyen, are you suggesting we can discuss that now, tonight?
No, I said on the 24th.
On the 24th, okay. Okay. Yeah. So hold, we don't need anything.
I think I have to call the roll.
So I moved it to table it until July 24th.
And the amendment.
To hold it, with the amendment as well.
With the amendment, oh, okay.
And
We need to do those separately.
I think that's a roll.
Okay.
It can be done as one motion.
Okay, that's what I just did, and I think Alderman
I seconded the
seconded
motion.
it. So-
And voice vote.
All right,
Yeah.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Nguyen. Okay, Chair of Economic Development, Alderman Nguyen. 02?
Yes, item 02, storefront modernization program application for 2113 Greenleaf. Staff and Economic Development Committee recommend approval of financial assistance through the storefront modernization program for 2113 Greenleaf in the amount not to exceed $25,000 for facade renovations associated with the building's redevelopment into several smaller office and warehouse spaces. The proposed scope of work includes demolition, masonry, carpentry, glazing, stucco, concrete, and metal work. The Economic Development Program's Business District Improvement Account is where this money is coming from. The approved fiscal year 2017 budget allocated a total of $350,000 for this account to fund both the storefront modernization grant and Great Merchant Grant programs. To date, $8,416.50 has been spent from this account, leaving $341,583 available. And if upcoming Great Merchant Grant funding requests are also approved, $283,033.50 will still remain available. I move this for action tonight.
I'll second.
Okay, Alderman Fisk?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I asked for this to be removed from the agenda. I intend to vote against it. First of all, I would like to know how much money we've spent or we've given to this particular developer over the years through storefront modernization and other grants for various developments. Second thing is that I've always looked at this as trying to improve a building and improve the help the owner of a building to bring their building up to code and up to a good and clean and modern appearance. But I think what we're paying for in this case is basically the same type of project that we've seen in other places where we're actually paying for the developer's own personal architectural vision, which is not, I think, in keeping with what the grant was intended to do. Now, that may be my own personal bias, but I'm hoping not. I'm hoping I can separate that out. But I have been concerned for a long time about how we're using this money and what we're getting for it in return. And my concern really is to end up with buildings that are clean and functional, and but not necessarily for a personal vision. That may be very hard to understand, but I think if you look at the pictures here, you can see that perhaps this is not where our money should be going.
Okay. Alderman Fleming?
So I asked the same question of staff as I was reading the packet, because knowing the design of the building, I had seen several, and I think I had seen the developer last year. And so to answer part of your question, Alderman Fisk, I know there's been several buildings, I believe, that we've participated in, where he's participating in this funding line for, one being $39,000 in 2015. But so my concern asking staff this was just what the overall goal is of this grant. I mean, I'm happy to help get these buildings open. It sounds like he's taking buildings that are underutilized and bringing business in, so I'm happy to support that. But I would like us to, I guess, think further about uses of this to make sure it's not going repeatedly to the same developer, and that this is a program that is widely used by other people, smaller buildings and such. And so I did talk to Paul a bit about that in economic development, and wanted to see if we had thought about looking at the parameters of this funding line to make sure we're utilizing it kind of across the city to many developers, versus one developer is kind of seeing this as his go-to pot of money when he, has a new project in town.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson?
Well, and I view it as the application is compliant with the program. So we have a program in place, and it's what it's there for. So if you look at the before and the after, you might not like the after, but certainly the before is begging for something to be done. So we have somebody who's willing to invest a very, very substantial amount of money, and who also, again, whether you like the design or don't like the design, has a track record of successful projects with adaptive reuse of existing buildings, and I think that conforms with our goals as far as sustainability and just promoting successful development. So I do intend to support it, and hopefully, if we want to make a change to the policy, we should change the policy, but I don't think we should deny the application, because it does comply with the program.
All right, thank you, Alderman Wilson. Alderman Nguyen?
I would like to comment that I believe, and I can't find it right now, that there is some limitation in the storefront modernization program as to the frequency that it can be used. And so that may already exist. If it doesn't exist, we should include it, but I'm fairly certain it does exist.
There's a limitation by building. So by property,
Okay.
yeah, but not by development.
But I also think that, we're not the taste police. I mean, if this developer, if this building owner comes in with a particular design, it's not up to us, I think, to decide whether we like it or not. And his track record is that he has taken very underutilized buildings, and they are now very successful. So, it's not my taste, but he seems to be able to make it someone else's taste. And so I agree with Alderman Wilson. He's met the requirements of our program, and so I'm supporting this.
Alderman Braithwaite?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Alderman Wilson, Alderman Nguyen, for your comments. It's a project that's in my ward. I think it meets the economic thresholds. Again, I'm not going to comment on his design preferences, but he is successful at what he does, and I think it'll be a perfect reuse given the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk?
Thanks, and I just want to correct Alderman Nguyen. I mean, I'm trying very hard to fight against being the taste place, so I'm not doing that, even though I would be, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. What I'm saying is that I believe that the money should go for making the building energy efficient, new window glazing, whatever, but not necessarily into changing the building design. So I want to take or interpret that as a more practical approach, and not comment on the design. I said the design was not necessarily to my taste, but I was trying to be very careful in making sure that my comments were not focused on the design, but on the way that the money is being spent. And I see the money spent on basically a design that does not provide practical considerations for the building. That's all I'm saying.
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, I think our history of this program is that it isn't just simply utilitarian. I mean, if you look at the buildings that we've helped with facade improvements, the programs have generally added a great deal of style and verve to whatever has been done. I mean, we aren't just simply installing basic windows. Some of these things have awnings and unusual lighting over time. So, I think that if it met staff's approval of what was necessary, and staff has a number of these come through and they don't always meet that, then I think that it's not up to us to decide we don't like the.
Okay. All right. Seeing no more lights, we have a motion that was seconded to approve O2 Storefront Modernization Program application for 2113 Greenleaf. City Clerk, can you take the roll?
Alderman Nguyen? Aye. Alderman Wilson? Alderman Ruth Simmons?
Aye.
Alderman Sufferton?
No.
Alderman Ravel? Aye. Alderman Rainey?
Aye.
Alderman Fleming?
Aye.
Alderman Fisk? Alderman Braithwaite?
All right. O2 passes on a 7-2 vote. All right. That is all we have on the standing committees to report. Call of the wards. We'll start with you, Alderman Wilson. Alderman Ruth Simmons?
No report.
Alderman Sufferton?
No report.
Alderman Ravel? Alderman Rainey?
Well, I want to thank Kimberly Richardson for all her work on the 4th of July parade and everybody else who worked on that. Also, several residents asked me to please comment and commend the workers who worked the recycling event at ETHS this weekend. They said it was absolutely the most organized, efficient operation they'd ever seen. And also to remind people that on Tuesday, the 18th, is the greatest food truck fest and concert in the world at Brummel Park. Get there early. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey. Alderman Fleming?
I just wanted to let the community know I'm going to have to cancel my ward meeting that's scheduled for July 22nd, but there will be a newsletter that's out, so please make sure you check your inbox for that. And also, Alderman Rainey and I are going to be joining forces for the National Night Out on August 1st, co-hosted with Ridgeville. So take a look for that information coming up.
Terrific. Alderman Fisk? Alderman Braithwaite?
I'm going to comment on this and then make a referral. So at our meeting earlier this evening for the Human Services, Dr. Effiam made a suggestion to revisit two committees that we merged together, the Housing and Homeless and Human Relations Commission. I know she's going to be coming back for a follow-up meeting. So, Wally, maybe you can help me out with the timing, but maybe we can put this on either the September or October Rules Committee meeting. And I'd like to know when the next time the committee meets, and I'm going to make my best effort to attend.
The rules, next time the Rules Committee will meet, or the next time Human Services meet?
No, I know the next time the Housing, Homeless,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
Human Relations Commission is going to meet.
Okay, I can let you know that.
Okay, perfect.
Alderman Nguyen?
Yes, just a quick report. The next Third Ward Town Hall meeting is Thursday, July 27th. It's going to be at the Caravali Montessori School, since Lincoln School is not in session right now. We'll start at 7 and go to 7 to 8:30. So that's Thursday, July 27th. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion? There is no executive session this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? All right. I presume nobody's opposed. Good night.